know about the
Yeah,
Twitter.
the top headlines are hot today. It's gonna be a fun one.
Yeah, very fun.
Good time.
What's good,
Okay,
Ken? How are
Cheryl,
you?
go ahead and jump into Twitter.
Both Kens, actually. We've got two Kens on stage.
That's right. Well, we were doing the Japanese thing, so it only
I'm
makes
here.
sense to bring up Mr. Mori to be the
Oh, yeah,
authority.
forgot to say Happy Chinese New Year or Lunar New Year to anyone celebrating as well. Didn't say that yesterday. But yeah.
Yeah, it's the second day. So normally it's the wives go back to their original family.
森さんまだ寝てないんですか?
So,
I'm
Cal, I
awake.
wanted to answer you just so that you understand. What I learned yesterday was the black heart or the fist is in celebration of Black History Month, but it was also very similar to how we were able to do our flag country of origin last summer, which was also in celebration to the World Cup, I believe, or the games last summer.
Yeah.
So it's, I guess, every time that we're having sort of an initiative, either in celebration monthly, this is something we're going to be able to do. And so if you put that symbol in your profile, so that will change, I think, month to month.
That's cool.
Good morning, everyone, from Twitter Spaces.
Good morning, JT.
Ooh, that's JT. Good to hear from you, guy.
Yeah, and we have a newbie on stage in Clubhouse today. So welcome, Abraham Thome, and welcome back, Shane.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Arashimase! As they say in Tokyo.
ようこそいらっしゃいませ。
Konbanwa.
A little bit of an off-piste question, but I'm thinking of picking up a fourth
I'm sorry,
language.
guys. I'm doing a little laundry. Terribly sorry. Hello, everyone.
Hello, Abraham.
森さん、なんか喋りたいでしょ?
Wait. Now I want to pick up a fifth
Happy New Year.
language,
Thanks
and I wanted to pick between Chinese and Japanese, and I don't know which one I should pick.
Yeah, Ken-san will tell you why you should choose Japanese.
Choose what?
I'm thinking of picking up a fifth language, and I don't know whether I should choose Chinese or Japanese.
Well, it depends which one you might invest in personally or economically.
It depends on whether you want to date a Chinese girl or a Japanese girl.
That's
That's a good initiative as well, definitely.
But if you date someone like me, I can do both. So.
Do you know that's funny because when my friend
only
Ken.
only a few kinds of people select Japanese, I believe, who love animation,
Manga.
cartoons, and video games, etc.
Cosplay.
Yeah, cosplay, exactly. And so many French people speak good Japanese because they love Japanese culture.
Yeah, Tyler can speak Japanese too.
Yeah, very well. And Michael as well.
I watch a lot of anime, so Japanese would be like my main initiative to learn Japanese.
Yeah, and as a language, Japanese is very easy to speak and listen to. Very difficult to write and read. So
it's easy to read most of it. The katakana, hiragana, is actually very easy, which is maybe it's 30% or 25%. So you'd be surprised. In 1 week, you could learn to read about 25% of Japanese. Honestly.
Oh, really?
Is that right?
Yes, because of the history lesson, because Japanese language was learned from the old Chinese, like 400 years ago. So basically, it's like a computing program language. So at the root, it's very, very strict and clear. So you can learn it and memorize it, just like Tyler said, in 1 week. Then you can read all the letters, but you may not know the the meaning of it, but you can read all the words.
Yeah,
Well,
but
I will
Yeah,
I
one
will
of
recommend Korean.
yes,
If you want to learn in 1 or 2 hours,
right.
you know,
Yeah, Korean.
people like you guys with IQ with so high can learn how to read
Yeah,
Korean,
Korean is,
read
yeah.
in the
yeah,
sound of
Korean is
Korean.
the
It's
written.
easy to do it in 1 hour.
It was designed to be the easiest language to learn to read. It's the newest
Yeah,
written language because
it's a man-made language.
yeah, it's kind of brilliantly designed intentionally in a very modern era for specifically that purpose. So, but by the, katakana is not so different. It's just 50 characters of all the sounds, and then what you'll realize is that as you walk around Tokyo, if you know katakana, you'll be stunned how much you understand as you walk around, you know, Tokyo, for example, or Osaka.
That's
Yeah,
good to hear.
because katakana
Yeah.
usually they
One
use katakana for foreign imported words.
Right.
So it's quite easy
mm,
for us to make sense out of katakana.
Yeah.
So like what Tyler said, katakana and hiragana is quite easy to memorize, but kanji is difficult.
I don't think kanji is so difficult. There was a, you know what? There's a book
You
called
are you are
Pictogram.
genius.
No, it's not. I don't think it's at all.
Yeah, if you
sometimes
understand
people
the
forget
structure.
that.
No,
Yeah,
because
but
People
basically,
forget their geniuses.
there's a book called Pictogram, and the Pictogram book explains the what the characters mean visually, graphically. So the like when you see the what the character for fire or rain or
sun, moon. Yeah.
Yeah,
tree,
kanji is
mount,
beautiful.
mountain, and tree.
It's ancient Chinese characters.
Right, but when you
Current Chinese are very different.
the word for tree looks like a tree. The word for forest looks like a bunch of trees. So like when you take that idea and start to understand it for a second, and you get this book called Pictogram, which very beautifully makes the characters look like what they sound like. Then every time you see that character, you'll never forget what it means. So because you understand the cartoon behind it, and if you pick up that book like I did, you will be able to do somewhere in the neighborhood of about 400 or so of the most common kanji characters, again, within a week. And then you'll be surprised. You'll be walking around and you know what these characters mean often, as they said. So anyway, enough Japanese or
でもタイラーの前
No,
世は
that
日
was
本人ですからしょうがないです。
タイラー、何もう一回言って。
タイラーの前世は日本人ですから。
Okay.
When you guys start,
That's great to hear.
when do you start the room? Like
yeah, we're ready.
top of the hour or?
Yeah, let's go.
We're ready. Anyone, Cal? Is there a hot story you want to kick us off today with?
Well, I just think I tweeted just now the Beijing Olympics start today. Politico had a room up there, but I think you guys have covered this. I saw it on a couple of replays. The app that the athletes have to use. Citizen Lab, which is a Canadian human rights kind of thing, has got something. So I tweeted that just now. I don't know if that's of interest. It's a little political, but that's something on my mind. I think you covered it, didn't you? Have some data guy coming in?
Yeah, data. Jonathan was actually here to share about it like twice.
Yeah, for about what's today? Wednesday, so it must have been Monday and Tuesday. We covered that. Yeah.
I have,
yes, ma'am.
another one. Well, yeah, just a regular one anyway. The U.S. job market lost about 300,000, so it's one of the dip in about a year because the economy they thought was out of COVID, but now they think Omicron caused this job loss.
Okay.
The January numbers are generally not that indicative, but Messi, that's a good point. But it's just January numbers. I would caution on extrapolating the January numbers for jobs. That's just conventionally known, but it is out there. The Google results were out of were brilliant, right? Tyler, I'm sure you'll cover that.
That's just top story today. So here we go. A traditional air horn. Cal, as usual, is on the money, predicting the top story of the day is that Google did their quarter four earnings report. Revenue rose 32% year over year. Holy cow! To be one of the biggest companies in the world and still grow revenue 32% in a year is mind blowing, honestly. And net income grew from 15 billion to 20 billion year over year. Cloud revenue rose from 3.8 billion to 5.5 billion. Stock rises 9% as a result, as it should, because that's a killer quarter result right there. And that kind of a result will cause the end of the short selling of all of the tech companies for the time being, because people realize, oh shit, Google is a kind of what we call kind of like a bellwether tech company that sets the whole trend for the tech sector. And if like Google's kicking that much ass, you don't want to be betting against it, and you don't want to be selling it, and it slows down the whole tech sell-off. Honestly, you might even start to see the beginnings of the rebound of the tech sector. Anywho, the additional
there's a thought I have on Tyler just on that, because I think the cycling into these big tech will start again, or just kind of go back, because the profits are what people are after.
Mm-hmm.
Some of these other stocks, I don't see them like massively recovering, right? Some of the the PayPals and just like there's a lot of tech that's just taken a massive hit, and it continues to take a massive hit, especially the ones that were not profitable and were effectively pumped either by a SPAC or a SPAC promoter, or pumped by just the space, right? All of them just got pumped, all of them indiscriminately, right?
Yeah.
And so it's going to be interesting. But I do think that these big tech companies, Microsoft before, now Google, very, very interesting to recycle into them and just stick with them, because they're just so. And the regulation issue, which I know we discuss here quite a lot, I don't know. I I just don't know how they can regulate and bring the profits down, because they're now just so too big to destabilize the markets with them now as well. So
I think Cal has a point that there may not be a widespread improvement in tech stock valuations for all the reasons he gave, because a lot of the profits are going to the bigger companies versus the ones that are not profitable. PayPal's down like 24-25% today, because I think their earnings were not good yesterday.
Oof. That's a drop. 25%. Jesus Christ.
Wait, who was that, Ken?
PayPal. So the next story, number 2, is the autonomous car company Cruise, which we've been following. They were in San Francisco. Well, Ellie's back. Hey, Ellie, let's get you on stage here. And also Christian, good to see you back again. The Cruise, last we heard from Cruise, they were in the San Francisco area with their autonomous taxi service, and they had humans in the front seat for a while. And then they got approval to have autonomous taxis without humans in the front seat in San Francisco. And then they went to New York with people in the front seat until they map the whole thing out. And then they'll remove the people in the front seat, and they'll have to go city by city, because that's how they're doing it, is they're learning the city instead of learning the whole planet, which is far, far, far harder, of course. But anyway, the headline today is that Cruise raises $1.3 billion. Jesus, that's a huge fundraise from SoftBank Vision Fund, which is, if you're going to raise a lot of money real fast, that's the one to do it, because Masayoshi over there in Tokyo, right next to the old Tsukiji Fish Market, Masa doesn't joke around. When he sees something he likes, he can throw $1 billion at it, as he did with WeWork, for example. Anywho, so the SoftBank is betting big on Cruise and launches a wait list for driverless robotaxi service in San Francisco that will run from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. That's interesting. So they're going to run it at night when there's way less traffic and people on the road. Interesting. Cruise is opening up its driverless robotaxi service to the public in San Francisco as the GM subsidiary creeps towards commercialization. Now, you have to recognize with GM playing a big role in this, that's kind of a brilliant move on GM's part, because these, as you've heard me rant, I don't know, 30 times over the past 6 months, that these autonomous networks of vehicles like Tesla's going to be doing, and Amazon's going to be doing, and Google's going to be doing, and GM is doing in this partnership with Cruise, they want to have their own autonomous vehicle delivery network, because the future is doing 24-hour, 7 days a week, 365 autonomous deliveries of people's products and goods with a multitude of utilization, so that they're not just delivering one thing or person or meal at one time. They want to be delivering, each vehicle will be doing 10 deliveries simultaneously. And you'll have some supercomputer AI, quantum AI in the background running the intelligence of that autonomous vehicle network in a way that only a supercomputer can. Like no human could logistically map out based on the real-time traffic signal. And now you know why a company like Waze was so incredibly valuable, or any company that knows the actual traffic of every road in real time. That data is insanely valuable when you are trying to map out how to most efficiently get everything in a city from A to B. Everything and everyone. So now you know why SoftBank's investing $1 billion, more than $1 billion, $1.35 billion in Cruise. Makes a lot of sense.
It's really an excuse to solve the traveling salesman problem.
So the next one, number 3. My God, we're making good progress today. Google brings its One VPN service, which has been available to Android users since the end of 2020, to iOS. So now iPhone users can play with Google's VPN. For users of Google's 2 terabyte cloud storage of $9.99 per month, $10 a month basically. So if you have the $10 per month Google Cloud plan for all of your Gmail, photos, documents, storage, and whatnot, then it comes free with that. The VPN service that's included with the Google One Premium subscription is finally available on iPhones, and Google promises, after Google's promise that it would come to iOS, here it is. Great. Simple one. Number 4, moving right along.
Absolutely sure that Google can see absolutely everything you're doing. That's the benefit of that.
Yeah. I thought I had the same kind of thought in my mind, which is, are you sure you want to have Google's VPN? Although maybe you could double dip and run the Google VPN with the Apple, whatever Apple's version of that VPN. What do they call it? Somebody recall? Delay something or other. If you run both.
The anonymous relay, do you mean?
Yes, the relay delay thing. Yeah. I wonder if you could figure out a way.
You just don't want a VPN to Google. That just means that all of your traffic, whatever you're doing, is coming out at Google's end, and they can have a very good look at absolutely everything. I mean, this is
right. And more importantly,
they've got their fingers in your pie enough as it is.
And the government already has a very cozy relationship with Google and subpoenaing them and all of the documents and information at the end of the day. I don't know that it would do you any real...
So wait, if you had a Google VPN in Nigeria, for example, could you go onto Twitter? You could, right?
In theory.
And yeah, in theory, yeah. Okay.
But then the government, Nigeria could tell Google, hey, Google, go ahead and print us out a list of everybody who's using your VPN and going to Twitter. That's the concern. I mean, that's the whole point of the VPN. But my point is that Google is so somewhat compliant with government data requests that I don't know that this would really help you in that case. It might help you in the really banal pedestrian use cases of like stopping, e-commerce ads from tracking you or something like that.
Abraham? Yeah, and small business like you're, yeah.
Abraham unmuted. You wanted?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment about why it is called One VPN. I mean, because it binds everyone together. But I'm sure, I mean, all joking and kidding aside, I'm sure that probably Google has something like surprising planned again. Probably they're going to use an algorithm, something like rifle anonymous network or something like, I mean, probably bind all the network together somehow, make it, I mean, obfuscated, sort of like, so, I mean, you become anonymized when using their VPN. At least probably that's how they're going to advertise it to the public, you know, as a selling point. Because at this point, almost everyone using a VPN knows that using Google One VPN probably is a bad scenario. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just remember you're not getting anything for free. You know, a lot of people use Google DNS 8.8.8.8.4.4.4, nice and fast, all cool. It just means that Google know every single query you do, of course. So every time you type a website, every time Google's serving that for you. They're not doing it for free. They provide these services for a reason. They want to harvest the data. And if
Hey,
you do a
someone,
VPN, they're getting
someone was
all
trying to
your
get
data.
in there.
Yeah,
Someone
Cheryl was
was
trying
trying
to.
to.
Go ahead, Cheryl.
No, just saying Opera browser also have free VPN, right?
I'm not sure if Opera browser does or not. Oh,
Yeah, it's free.
okay. So Francine Hardaway, welcome back, and we are moving right.
Thank you.
Yeah, where are we at here? We did Alphabet Google's quarter earnings report. We did the cruise fundraising from SoftBank and the Google VPN. The next is from Ben Thompson, who has a tech blog called Stratechery, and he's talking about what we were talking about yesterday, which is about all of these gaming acquisitions. And his blog post says it's about how the acquisitions of Zynga by Take-Two and Activision Blizzard by Microsoft and now Bungie yesterday by Sony reveal an industry evolution that extends far beyond gaming. Yeah, that's exactly what we were talking about 24 hours ago. It does set the landscape that, yeah, we talked exactly about this whole new.
Hey, Tyler, did you discuss, or the team here, like, to discuss the potential going forward? Not that we give investment advice here, but are there any potential gaming companies that are just sitting like waiting to be bought out?
Yeah, I mentioned. I think it's one to really keep an eye on is Unity, because in what's happening in a weird way is, notice who's at the point I made yesterday, and Cal wasn't here for this, and I think it was a point worth repeating for those who didn't hear it yesterday. It's interesting to note who's making these acquisitions, and in one case, it's Microsoft was acquiring Activision, right? And when we think about where the world's going into a kind of metaverse landscape, Microsoft and the metaverse is a combination of hardware and games slash experience, and games and films are kind of merging as well, especially in the metaverse. So Microsoft is hardware, right? They've done a ton of hardware, including Xbox, and they've done already have their HoloLens AR. You know, they're clearly going to go in deeper into that, and they're big into games with Xbox. So you can check those off. And then you've got the other big acquisition was Sony just acquired this gaming studio, and Sony as well is not. I mean, it's one of the biggest hardware manufacturers the world's ever known. And the question is, will they go make a hardware for the metaverse? I think that's the obvious indication of them acquiring this game company, partly because
they have the PlayStation VR 2 that they recently announced during CES, which is a big move, sort of like in tandem with this acquisition.
Thank you, JT, for kind of proving the point. So the Sony is a hardware company. They're big into games. They're also huge into movies. And I'm saying this as somebody who worked there momentarily when I first moved to LA. Sony Interactive Entertainment, which is who made this acquisition. And make no mistake, it's a movie studio buying a game company, essentially. And that's really, and it's no ordinary movie studio buying a game company. It's a movie studio that's parent company is huge into games and hardware, and no doubt will become a huge player in this VR metaverse space. So it's like the hardware companies are. Facebook's going to have to acquire multiple video game companies. They already are, by the way. They're being very specific and very selective and hitting VR. They're already starting to acquire. We've already seen some of the headlines and they already have a fund set up specifically for the purpose of acquiring VR studios who are making VR games or experiences specifically. But this is the new developing battle, is this next big era of who's going to be a player in the future of computing as we go into...
And yeah, I can't imagine anyone hungrier than Sony, wanting not to miss out on the next bit.
Sony
They've
and
missed out on everything else.
Yeah, so Sony and Facebook both, because Facebook also missed out on the smartphone era. For those who don't know, Facebook tried to make a smartphone and failed rather fabulously because they understood the importance of having the device, and they understood how vulnerable they could be as being riding on top of the device layer, that those devices, which are Apple and Google, could someday turn against them. And by the way, that just happened in the past 6 months. Apple did just turn against Facebook and made cut off the data flow that Facebook depends on for its ad networks. And that worst case scenario is unfolding, which is only expediting and putting a fire under the ass of Facebook to go even faster and more furious into the metaverse.
Sony had the collaboration with Sony Ericsson for the smartphone, but of course, couldn't keep up eventually.
Right. Anywho,
but also,
yeah.
Hey, Tyler, this is Christian. I mean, yeah, there's definitely, so my name's Christian. Business intelligence at PlayStation. I think there's a lot of stuff that people are kind of just missing for the, and not everything is metaverse and NFTs and stuff. I know this is that's a big word, right? But really this Bungie acquisition, for those that are not familiar with gaming, but you'll have heard of the titles like Halo and Destiny. This was really just a land grab, in my opinion, that is just like, let's make sure we, I think it's vertically integrate. So to just buy more companies up, because after the acquisition with Microsoft and Activision, it was like, like everybody in like my work was like, oh, dude, what's the next step? Are we going to lose Call of Duty? And I thought that was kind of funny. They're like, all right, cool. If they're going to take Call of Duty, we're going to take Destiny.
Right.
And because that's another really big game in the gaming space. But, I just wanted to put that out there as well. Like, this is just a like, hey, let's buy up our competitors. And I'm really curious to see what EA is going to do, what, EA is still independent kind of. And I'm curious to see what other acquisitions are going to happen this year. Yeah. So this is Christian. I'm complete.
Thanks, Christian. But that brings me back to the point I was making about Unity, which is there's the big companies with the hardware backings and whatnot, like the Sonys and Microsoft and whatever, who are making these big acquisitions. There's another element, which is the platforms so they're acquiring content producers, so to speak, to oversimplify it. And these content producers are these huge game publishers like Zynga and or Activision is Activision's kind of a whole network of content creators, and Bungie is a massive creator, and the creators create on a very limited number of platforms, very notably Unity and Unreal. So those two play a very, very interesting role because a large disproportionate number of the content that's being created are being created on either Unreal or Unity. So I think if somebody were to acquire Unity, you kind of by extension, it's kind of a superpower move, because a lot of these content producers, and I'm not referring to your cousin who makes little YouTube videos, I'm talking about massive game studios who are still content producers, are building on either Unity or Unreal or both, and that would be an interesting. Unity to me plays a super interesting, pivotal role in the future of metaverse or game or movie, all three, games and movies.
And Unity just acquired a company called Ziva Dynamics, which is sort of similar kind of similar to Unreal's MetaHuman, which allows you to create like realistic human rendered avatars.
Yeah.
Not so much avatars, but like humans,
Yeah.
realistic. And so that was a huge move that they made.
Are you
the
talking
other
about
day,
the skins?
ties into the gaming
Yes.
aspect.
Yeah. Those two
Yeah,
are both they're being very understandably competitive with each other, because I mean, in images we had Photoshop as a default for a very long time, and just to make the analogy for those who don't dabble in the space, it's Unity and Unreal are, to oversimplify it, kind of what Photoshop is to images. It's the platform where the magic and the creation, the creativity happens. So, Dr. Fran, you wanted to say?
Oops, sorry.
yeah. I wanted to add like just of that when it comes to high level renders and just quality normal maps and pictures, like there are other companies that are trying to get up into this space, right? So I'm literally focusing on Polygon and Solana. They pretty much do the same thing in terms of being an engine towards the metaverse, right? So I wonder where they're going to be placed between Facebook, Sony, and Microsoft, right? And what the interplay is going to be with those ones, because they are trying to get traction and be, just have a big user base. I saw the CMO, I believe it was, of Solana on Twitter Spaces just the other day, and that there's so many other things that are happening. And also another person like that's high up in Polygon was also in another Twitter space. So getting these people onboarded using these programs outside of Unity and Unreal Engine, which is what the professionals use, right? What you were saying, Tyler. So that would be like SketchUp basically. So there's just different levels to this gaming thing. However, I forgot who it was, but someone said something about Facebook being direct within the market of VR, right? And those two companies point towards there. So I would say Polygon and Solana may be in the picture just based off how they're working within the space, especially with the users as well.
Wait,
I
I
think
one thing can I just clarify something? So, well, one, by the way, I just looked up Unity. It's down, Tyler, 25% in January, this year to date, which is very interesting, right?
Yeah.
Opportunity if you take your thesis, but no investment advice. But here's what I was curious about. Is like, so is Unity an alternative to these two? So, is
Unity.
No,
Solana
nothing to
an
do with
alternative
these
to
have got
Unity, or is
nothing.
it a whole different game?
Okay,
To do
yeah,
with each other whatsoever. Unreal Engine and Unity are game development engines.
yeah,
They're a suite where you bring.
yeah. Oh wait, who wants to explain it? I don't mind.
Let Ben go.
Yeah. And Solana, so Unity and Unreal are game development engines. They do most of the common functionality you would have to recreate from scratch for you. Some studios do recreate it from scratch. Some of the very best games are some Sony games like the Uncharted series or anything else by Naughty Dog, Last of Us, etc. They do not use Unity or Unreal. They use a custom engine built by Jason Gregory and others from the ground up. And but generally, if you're going to start game development, you would have to recreate a whole load of common functions that you don't want to be bothered with. Things like managing the 3D world, importing assets, and so forth. A lot of the creativity by volume actually happens outside of the engines. It happens in things like Maya or Blender or 3D Studio or whatever. For the 3D and 2D assets are actually created outside. Of course, the engine brings it all together and ships the final game code. And they're a
And
vital tool and they're
Polygon
amazing. But Polygon and Solana have got nothing to
Polygon
do with
is a
that whatsoever.
blockchain.
There. Yes, Polygon and Solana have got absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with that. They are Ponzi scheme blockchains that'll be around for a little while and then won't. And they've got absolutely nothing to do with game development whatsoever. And if they say they have, then that's just rubbish. So anyway, just some thoughts.
I think one element we haven't discussed it yet. We actually try to connect to that. The big tech obviously wants to get into and take the first position. I mean, pretty much like in terms of the metaverse, and then obviously gaming is directly connected with it. But I think the way things are moving in the entertainment industry is going to be, especially the movies, as the day go by, like we are more sort of moving towards where you can actually make the whole movie in the studio, in the gaming studio, because it's going to get so real. So if you look at like some of the movies that's come out just now, there is a certain element that, the actual production companies has to go out and then with this, settings and, production sets and all that, but major portion of the movie is being made on the computer itself. So think of it like if his top 10 grossing movies are sort of bringing in so much money, then the major portion of it like is being done on the actual, animation, then obviously major movie production companies is going to be also interested. So might as well like Netflix going to be looking into actually going into, acquiring a gaming engine or gaming company. So it's not just some of the top tech companies is going to be looking into, acquiring the space in the metaverse. Is going to be maybe like a movie side as well. So that's another angle to this whole
Yeah,
acquisition.
They already.
I wanted to make clear my point, right, which was Solana and Polygon are separate but also within that realm, right? Whether people believe they're Ponzi schemes or not, they are players in the space, and there's a lot of people that believe in them.
They don't provide any game development
I didn't
facilities
say
whatsoever, though,
I didn't
as
say
far as I
that they
understand.
did that also.
Oh,
But
okay. I thought you were saying
yeah,
they were an
no, I was
alternative to
talking
Unity
about,
and Unreal.
yeah, I
That's
wasn't comparing them to them. Like I've
No,
been
they're
within,
blockchains and they're the
yeah,
kinds of things that you build games on top of.
exactly. So I was saying they're in the space of VR, and that was the other point to what Tyler was mentioning about what Facebook would like to do. But when it comes to Unity and Unreal, and generative engines, those are completely different. Like there's not really a matchmaking process when it comes to those two separate entities. And I just wanted to make, because I don't believe I said that Polygon or Solana were game engines in any stretch of the imagination.
All right, should we get to the next one? AMD's quarterly earnings report revenue of nearly $5 billion, up 49% year over year. That's a fantastic year, incredible growth for a company of that scale.
Is that the chip?
Yes.
Oh, the graphics chip.
Yes.
Yeah.
AMD. Computing and graphics revenue of $2.6 billion, up 32% year over year. And enterprise, embedded, and semi-custom revenue of $2.2 billion, up 75% year over year. AMD reported fourth quarter earnings after the market closed Tuesday. Wow, 49% year over year. That's incredible. So the next one is particularly interesting. That some dude named Elon Musk announces something called Starlink Premium, a $500 a month tier of Starlink. And for those who don't know, Starlink is the satellite internet provider, which was charging about $100 a month for about 50 megabits per second, and requires about Ben. Did you get Starlink? Was it $1,000 for the original OG dish receiver?
got it. Engineer one. Unfortunately, the geolock to his BT Research Labs didn't work where we were, but I have seen it. Yeah.
Yeah. So the new Starlink Premium will cost 5 times more. It'll be $500 a month, but it claims that it will be 150 megabits per second, and it's possibly as high as 500 megabits per second, depending on how many trees are in your neighborhood, ostensibly. And
That's really expensive.
that's very expensive. Yeah, but 500
Tyler,
megabits.
the new antenna carries an upfront cost of 205
No,
2,500.
there you go. 2,500 for the new antenna, 500 a month for somewhere between 150 and 500 megabit per second speeds, which in that case, you might be able to use it for your business. And if you're a business that needs to operate on the top of, Kilimanjaro, or, out in the ocean on an oil rig, I could understand that it could be worth, or you could be floating.
Or in a country where they don't want you connecting to the internet unless you go through their sovereign cloud.
Right. Or you're floating in low Earth orbit, for example, on your own satellite, as you do. You don't really have a lot of options at that point, Cal. So you might.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good market size. I think Botswana
For
might
cities
enjoy it
dollars,
up in
we
the
have no
Kilimanjaro.
pain point for that. But I guess for countryside, like up in the mountains or somewhere in a deserted place, I guess you have no choice but to have that.
Right. So
how much confidence do we have that there won't be a burst of demand from premium users that'll compromise the bandwidth for non-premium users?
Interesting question. Starlink high performance antenna, he tweeted out, this is twice the area of your standard phased array with broader scan angles. So faster is what it comes down to. I wonder if the latency is also shorter.
Yeah, the latency fundamentally can be shorter than anything terrestrial because there's less distance, total distance to travel.
Yeah.
To just pop up to a low orbit and across and back down, you can take a very straight line. But also, more importantly than the straight line, is that light travels in optical fiber at nowhere near the speed of light. Whereas up in space between the relay satellites, it does travel very close to the speed of light, at the speed of light. So you can get much lower latencies, actually, which is counterintuitive, but true. And with regards to whether these premium users will kind of saturate the bandwidth, it depends on the geographic density of them. Starlink is not or never will be as competitive for like a metropolitan area as it is for slightly more sparsely populated, because a given satellite has only got a certain amount of bandwidth in its footprint. So if a lot of users in cities decide that this is a good idea for then that could cause congestion. But if it's spread out geographically, then the system is very scalable and very cool.
Yeah. Alrighty. Next up is that EA, Electronics Arts, which by the way, the name was just mentioned a minute ago, does their quarter earnings reports, revenue of 1.79 billion, up from 1.67 billion, net income of 66 million, down from 211 million year over year, and et cetera, et cetera. Electronics Arts met expected earnings today for the third fiscal quarter ending in December 31. As the game publisher saw big engagement with existing games, EA CEO Andrew Wilson says NFTs are not something the company is driving on. Just 3 months after calling NFTs and blockchain the future of our industry. And why would he have such a turnabout? That might be because he saw some of his friends in the industry make announcements and saw the market reaction, which was not very favorable, honestly. And there's a whole lot of debate amongst the gamer community as to around NFTs, because as many of my friends who have been in the gaming company space for a very long time, and we should bring in Paul from the
Hey Tyler, did you see the Gizmodo article yesterday on OpenSea?
Yeah.
That 80% of the free minted NFTs on OpenSea, they have a free minting feature that they're allowing people to do. I think it's 5, I don't know what they're calling them, 5 sets with 50 pieces each, and or 5. A user can do 5 collections with up to 50 pieces each to try and get people into the space and for free. And Gizmodo just had an article yesterday that 80% of those are either scams, fake, IP rips, etc. And so OpenSea stopped it, turned it off, and then turned it back on in the same day because they had too much user pushback. So
Right.
This is a Gizmodo article.
Precisely.
Yeah.
So Paul, who I've met in real life in Stockholm, he works at King Games, the makers of Candy Crush. He's like the lead of Candy Crush, but he's American, and many other gaming, managing directors, friends of mine, have said, they're of the mind that they've been dabbling in virtual goods for a decade, where you could buy virtual fishing rods and swords and avatars and on and on and on and on. This is kind of boring to them, honestly. And there is, NFTs are unique in some regard, but they don't necessarily perceive it as the optimum solution. So that's why there's a bit of a debate amongst the actual game developers who actually make the games, like Andrew Wilson here at EA, about how they feel about NFTs, because they've got quite strong, they've got a whole lot of time and air mileage on these issues of virtual items and how best to manifest them inside of their games.
Tyler, this is a very interesting topic because you're talking about IPs that are very valuable. So if you take Sony, for example, and the acquisition they made from Halo, if you take the character and you create an NFT out of that, let's say the entire ecosystem exists, right? And then the user has that NFT of that avatar with a particular design. Now, the user? Does the user have control over that avatar and is able to essentially manipulate that character and thus like alter and tarnish the IP of the brand?
Right.
So this is one thing they have to like really consider before like jumping into NFTs.
Yeah, good example. All right.
Hey, Tyler, one other point I wanted to make is people mentioned, you mentioned Unity, EA. These are $30 billion plus market cap companies, and there aren't that many Microsofts who can afford to buy a company of that size at a premium. So if you're going to see some activity in this space with companies that are 30 billion plus, you might see some more mergers without premiums, assuming that they can get over the corporate culture issues of who runs the company and the other corporate culture issues when you do kind of a merger of equals. But you might see some of that because the valuations are pretty high, and few companies can afford to do what Microsoft did with Activision.
True that. Okay, next up it says this is from the Wall Street Journal, amid tech stocks' poor performance, especially IPOs, some venture firms are cutting back investments and startup valuations as they renegotiate funding deals. Venture firms foresee tougher funding environment ahead with more muted debuts after pandemic led. And what's really going on is because this is not a scenario where the Wall Street Journal is a real authority on these issues. I can ping in 100 friends who are the top angel investors in the world.
No, but Tyler, that was the same story I told you. The information ran or very similar on Tiger a couple of days ago. Just that I couldn't really get you the article for the reasons of the way that paywall and everything. But it's the same type of story.
Yeah, but the real story generally, and maybe
It's about time.
yeah, the valuation, there was a valuation bubble for startups. I mean, let's just call it what it is. Like the valuations were getting crazy town at the end of 2021, and they were way overdue for a correction. It was getting ridiculous. It was not sustainable, and it's good for the whole ecosystem that if you want to call it a bubble and a popping or a soft pop or whatever you want to call it, just bringing them back down to kind of earth. It doesn't help startups when they're going into their A rounds, with these billion-dollar valuations. It's just ridiculous. So it
I
needs to
was going to say they can never raise another round
right. You get
that
stuck.
isn't a down round.
Precisely
So
right.
you really,
Yes. Preach. Go ahead, Francine. Didn't mean to stop you.
no, I mean that's basically it. You
Right.
get $1 billion round, and then the next round you get turns out to be a down round, and then suddenly all the publicity is against you, and
Right.
then suddenly you're not a success anymore. So
Right.
it doesn't do these startups any great favor to heap all this money on them.
That was sort of the point. Yeah. That these exuberant valuations that startups were raising at in 2021 just it was a bit beyond the pale, and it was like I said, kind of had an unsustainable kind of flavor to it, and now they're coming back down to more realistic levels, and that's to me the real story. What the Wall Street Journal says is that the recent stock rout is rattling the multi-billion-dollar market for startups after a long run of record investments, nosebleed valuations, and rapid-fire deal making. Okay, yeah, that you sound
Yeah,
like
that rapid fire, Tyler, to your point, to add to Francine to your points, is also that, they have shitty investors coming in who are doing no diligence and just throwing money at them. So reputable investors don't really have the option to get in because they want to do diligence. And they're like, look, we want to look at you before we dump this in. And so you end up with people who aren't even helping to manage the company going forward, right? So that's another thing that hurts these startups.
that says investors say several large startup backers are cutting back their investments, curtailing a flow that sprayed at full blast for most of the pandemic, particularly for older, more mature startups. And venture firms say they are advising their companies to prepare to conserve cash in a tougher funding environment. Well, tougher relatively because you couldn't have an easier fundraising environment than 2021. It was never easier. It's never going to be that easy, perhaps ever again. It was absurd. You had people
I
throwing money.
worry about Clubhouse, Tyler.
Well,
I worry about if Clubhouse doesn't need another round for another
right.
year, I don't think, but even so,
They have
how are they?
A60B.
Well, it's not that. It's that Clubhouse was came out at a time when fundraising valuations were getting very, very high, and they were able to participate in one of those very high valuation deals. And but if the entire industry's kind of self-correcting at the same time, no single company is getting a black eye in this. So I don't know that I'd be that concerned.
Yeah, I'm with Cheryl as well. I think they have a different dynamic with Mark Andreessen and you know they'll kind of sustain them through bridge loans or whatever money they need next year to wait for the valuation to catch up. But it's the deflation, Tyler. You're dead right. It's so needed. Every once in a while, you know, I've been around enough to see like the 2000, 2001, and then 2007, 2008. It gets really, and I'm sure you've seen this, Tyler, right? It gets really actually quite healthy after a little bit of a correction, right?
Yeah,
And it's just a lot more healthy. To Francine's point, the valuations, you know, you don't get greedy. You have a better relationships with investors. To Jennifer's point, you know, good investors can have the time to do the due diligence, right? So sometimes, and it was a little out of control last year. It really was. People here in Oxford would like just walk around, you know, like I'm worth five. You know, they have a deck, they have you know, a piece of technology they haven't even figured out how to spin out of the university yet. The university is asking for 50% of the equity. So it's a dumb thing Oxford does. They haven't negotiated it down, and they're sitting there and they're saying, you know, we're worth like 10 million because that's what's happening in Silicon Valley, right? So I just think that there are better conversations now, and hopefully moving forward. But I'm not sure that this corrects as quickly as it should. It has to filter down to the entrepreneurs, and they need to understand that at least the ones that are raising for the first time, right? So, but it's kind of healthy, I think.
yeah, yeah, not a bad thing. But I just want to call out the Wall Street Journal's kind of tabloidish, salacious verbiage in that opening paragraph of nosebleed valuations and rapid fire deal making. It's like they're trying to turn it into like an MMA sport or something.
Yeah,
Uh,
this is Danish, Tyler. I
yeah,
just wanted to add something because we're just so people are aware, we were raising in this environment, not just the nosebleed one, but the current one, and I've got to say, I think a lot of this has more to do with hype on both ends. So the good founders, the founders that have a lot of FOMO in their deals, are still getting
yep,
30, 40x multiples on revenue right now, and it's not changed at all.
yep,
I think was there a sort of, oh shit, let's pause for a second moment? It actually was, but the nuance here is it wasn't happening at the top tier VCs. This was happening primarily at emerging fund managers or first time VCs or VCs that were raising from an LP base that was not as mature. So as people may not, and again, Tyler, I can go into this, but I'll keep it short. You know, in terms of when you're an emerging fund manager, which means this is your first fund that you've raised, a lot of your limited partners or the people that actually fund these VCs tend to be non-institutional, which means they're not family offices or fund of funds or large institutional endowments. They tend to be, you know, ultra high net worth individuals that you know, rely on equities for a lot of their liquidity. And what the reason why there was a pause was because there was a concern. And the worst thing, by the way, that can ever happen to a VC fund is they ask for capital calls. They're about to make an investment. They ask their LP base to put in money for that investment, and that money doesn't come. That is like reputation damaging. And so what the reason why there was an oh shit moment was because they wanted to get on the phone with all of their limited partners or their investors, the investors in the fund itself, and make sure that they had the cash for them to actually do the deal. And that nuance, unfortunately, is being missing from everything that I'm hearing and listening. And the reason why I know this is because one of the funds that invested in our seed round was an emerging fund manager. And when I learned about that, and then another one of the funds that invested in ours is a very well-known large fund that is not an emerging fund manager. And the differences between those two are striking. And what has happened, the reason why valuations have gone, quote unquote, sky high is not just because of the fact that the pandemic accelerated digital technology, and not just because there was a lot more competition, a lot more new companies starting. It was actually because we have seen democratization of VCs through these individual check writers who are LPs, many of whom have made money in the stock market, in the crypto market, as founders themselves. And those were the people that were being affected by the liquidity crunch or just the crunch in the equities market. So I wanted to make sure that people actually understand the nuance behind this, because to try to claim that A16Z stopped writing writing checks, or that the valuations are dropping for Dina Shakir at Lux Capital, this is not the case at all. That's not true at all. They're still making great deals. The best deals are still getting funded by top tier investors. It's just for the emerging fund managers, they were a little bit scared. Just wanted to kind of clarify that aspect.
Thank you. Next is from Reuters. They say they have sources that Indian officials have held tense and heated discussions with Facebook, Google, Twitter, and Coup, which we'll explain what that is in a second, over proactively removing fake news. Indian officials have held heated discussions with Google, Twitter, Facebook for not proactively removing what the Indian government describes as fake news on their platforms, sources told Reuters, the government's latest altercation with big tech. The officials from the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting strongly criticized big tech and said their inaction on fake news was forcing the Indian government to order content takedowns, which in turn drew international criticism that authorities were suppressing free expression, two sources said. The sources, who were familiar with the proceedings at the virtual meeting on Monday, described the conversation as tense and heated, signaling a new low in the ties between American tech giants and Prime Minister Modi's administration. The officials did not issue any ultimatum to the big tech companies at the meeting, the sources said. The government has been tightening tech sector regulations, but wants companies to do more on content moderation. The meeting was a follow-up to the ministry's use of emergency powers in December and January to order the blocking of 55 channels on Google's YouTube and some channels on Twitter and Facebook. The government has said the channels were promoting fake news or anti-India content and that the disinformation was being spread by accounts based in neighboring Pakistan. The ministry did not respond to a request for comment on the meeting, which was also attended by Indian content sharing platform called ShareChat and Coup, which is India's domestic version of Twitter, for example, which have millions of users in the country. Facebook, now known as Meta, Twitter, and ShareChat declined to comment. Without commenting on the meeting, Google said in a statement it reviews government requests and, where appropriate, we restrict or remove content in keeping with local laws. Coup said it complies with local laws and has strong content moderation practices in place. In its transparency reports, Twitter has said the Indian government makes among the highest number of requests to remove content from its platform. Technology website called Comparatech in November said India made 97,000 content removal requests in 2020, the second highest in the world after Russia, mostly to Facebook and Google. During the meeting, senior tech executives told the officials that they take adequate measures to remove or curb the spread of misinformation on their platforms and act on legally valid content removal requests, said the sources. The officials told Google to review its internal guidelines to remove fake content automatically, said the sources. The officials also said the government was disappointed that big social media platforms, including Facebook and Twitter, weren't detecting and removing such content on their own. Instead, the government was forced to order takedowns, opening it to criticism and damaging its public reputation, the officials said during the meeting. According to the sources, executives from Google told the ministry officials that one way to resolve that was for the ministry to avoid making takedown decisions public. Oh, interesting. The firms could work with the government and act on the alleged fake content, which could be a win-win for both sides, Google said, according to one of the sources. The idea was summarily rejected by the government officials, who said that the takedowns also publicized how the companies weren't doing enough to tackle fake news on their own. While ordering takedowns of certain online accounts in January, the government said it was doing so to, quote, secure the overall information environment in India, adding that such fake content was on, quote, sensitive subjects such as the Indian Army, India's foreign relations, and local state elections. Digital rights advocates say such government orders curb free speech and set a worrying precedent. Quote, detailed takedown orders are not made public by the government, said the executive director at Internet Freedom Foundation, adding that the basis for the action was not explained. This allows authorities to censor content even if it does not violate public order or the security of the state. So India's starting to feel, in some sense of embarrassment about the number of takedown requests, which are extremely high, and they want the tech platforms to do it automatically so that they don't have to ask them to do it. Clinton has his hand raised in Twitter Spaces. Go ahead, Clinton, and welcome back.
Thank you, Tyler. I've been extremely busy here in Canada this last week with mass demonstrations occurring in our capital. So, and it sort of ties into this very point that you're bringing up. So without the specifics of embarrassment and things like that in India, and on past Twitter Spaces here that you've hosted, the fake news thing really is becoming a problem. And so the question becomes, how do we better regulate media content or media coverage so that it is based in some form of accuracy or some form of truth around accepted facts? And so the problem, as I see, is that it's often the sort of the fringes of society or the extremes of society that have essentially hijacked many of these platforms. It's causing, not just India, but Canada, the United States, other countries to, ask for content to be removed, and not necessarily, removing content for the sake of removing content, but quite often, some of this misleading, inaccurate disinformation campaigns can lead to violence, can lead to, a complete breakdown of social cohesion within society. And so this is probably the biggest problem, the developed world, for this decade. I mean, I can't think of a more sort of pressing issue when it comes to social cohesion, like within the global community as a whole. So anyways, I'll just place myself on mute.
Yeah, Tyler, it's Asif here. But I think it's really worrying when executive branch of a country tells media organization or social media platform to take X or Y down. I think that should be left to the judiciary. If it's that relevant, then let them, who are supposed to be independent, make that judgment. Censorship of any kind should not be permitted in a true democracy.
Exactly, 1000%.
I just
No,
pinned.
but that's exactly the tension. So Clinton and Asif just drew out the tension there, which is how do you regulate without the other side is free speech. So how to bring down disinformation, misinformation that is damaging, a lot of economies, just our as Clinton said, it's our nations, and versus free speech, right? That's the other side, and you're getting people's values. People are arguing based on their values and their tribes, etc. But regulating that, it's to leave it to the judiciary. That becomes fact based, right? So that'd be a very slow way to regulate it. But again, it's just an issue. Like I don't have an answer here, but yeah.
Yeah,
Just,
but I want to say that we're
And
speaking about publishers, but social media is not a publisher, right? Like we were very clear about that,
No,
especially
social
within.
media is a distributor, but here's the deal. So there's
Exactly.
different. This came up
Yeah,
yesterday, and
exactly.
again, 230 is an American law, so that applies to actions in the U.S. and it's a defense if somebody tries to sue Facebook or somebody saying you're publishing disinformation. They would one, prove it's just disinformation, but two, they would just flat out say under 230 we're protected. That's a defense. It's not someone comes to them and says, hey, you're moderating and you're violating 230. So, but again, that's the US. And so then you've got India who's saying, which we've talked about for a year, that if they want to do business in these different nations, they have to abide by the local laws, the local governments, right? But then for that traffic in that nation. And it gets really challenging with these global companies. I mean, their actions in India are not going to, necessarily impact their Section 230 protections in the US, but they may have to operate differently in other countries. But again, as a global platform, it becomes challenging. And, oh God, what's I going to say?
Can
Yeah,
I
just as we
can I
become
just
a global
say
world. Yeah, go on.
can I
Sorry.
just say, Jennifer, to that point, then we're not talking about democracy or free speech or any of those things when we're talking about social media and moderating social media. I'm pretty sure everyone here understands the brevity of what happens on Twitter and the type of speech that happens on Twitter, whether you like or not, right? So there's a separation between blocking publishers and blocking social media. So there's no need for anyone to have social media, and we can still have a democracy because it's happened before. So
But right, so I'm saying
yeah,
social media is not going anywhere. Social media is here to stay, but social media is, as you note, not a publisher. We talked about this yesterday. Social media, they're supposed to be a neutral platform that's minorly moderating, and they use different tools for that to try and stay within their, in the US, 230 protections. Publishers are held liable, right? Because they're expected to um, they provide editorials and they do moderate. And so a publisher, like a paper, can be held liable, as we noted that New York Times has, who's it, Palin suing and some others. So yes, social media is different from a publisher. It's considered a distributor, but as you note, it's something that we're using laws that were not created for this type of distribution and this type of breadth and amplification.
That
So
said, Jennifer, but social media has now become an individual's way of expressing themselves. And so I think it's about individual right to express is as important as right of executive branch. So if the executive branch doesn't like something, then the ballot box is where they need to win. And if they
that's
win,
Wait,
part of
as
the
and they
noted,
can go
so
and
politicized.
change, yeah, but they can
you
go and
can sue
change the
the
law.
individual, right? Yes, they can, absolutely, but they can. But I'm just pointing out the challenges here. But an individual can be held liable, right? They are the publisher of their own content. If you say something about me or use my IP, I would go after you, but I can't go after the platform. Is what I'm saying.
Exactly,
And as I pointed
exactly.
out, those are the two tensions. Is the tensions are between how would it be regulated versus you're bringing up the free speech rights, which again, that's just a value because free speech is in the US, your rights against government, not against platforms. They don't have to let you say anything. But and in other countries, may or may not have free speech, quote. But anyways, but as you're pointing out, that's a value that people have. And then as Clinton pointed out, too many people's asserted rights in free speech are disinformation that are causing a lot of harm in society. So you're pointing out the various aspects here. I think everybody's speaking in sync here.
you just
Yeah,
pinned
Yeah,
to
one
the
I
Yeah,
top
can
feel
I
of
go
I
the
back
feel
to
Twitter
the
like
Can I
can,
jump in
can
on
I go
2
back to
points?
can
the
I
to
just
the
say
headline?
Hold
Can
on.
we go back to the headline? The
Yeah.
headline was about India, right?
Yep.
I just want to, yeah, just so
Yeah.
this discussion can probably go on for another few hours, but I just wanted to, Tyler, I see you got another one up there as well, and I
Yes.
just the nuance with from those headlines is interesting to understand how India and Pakistan, that thing has been going on for years, right? This
Yep.
mistrust and the idea, and then between the existing government and their influence versus the opposition, you probably find five people will come on this stage from the opposition party and say, the government's been putting fake news out there, right?
Right.
So to Asif's point, I think it's interesting to see what kind of powers the government has. I like the idea of the judiciary having that. That's a comment on that.
Yeah.
And I like
Can
the
I?
new headline you got up there as well. That's interesting. The
Well, I
Thai
want to touch
government
on
power.
this one real fast. So it speaks to it precisely as a nice follow up to what Jennifer was just saying, which is that the individual can be held responsible. Check out what Thailand has just decided in the past 24 hours to do. Watch this. I just pinned it to the top of the clubhouse room. Cheryl, if you can, please share it at the top of the Twitter space. It says Thai government sets up fake news centers to combat misinformation. A government spokesperson has confirmed the formation of news centers dedicated to dealing with fake news on social media. Centers will be created at 3 different levels to coordinate efforts to combat the spread of misinformation. The cabinet has already approved a draft regulation submitted by the Prime Minister's office. The draft will serve as a guide to deal with fake news, particularly information which creates social divisions, ruins the country's reputation, and damages the economy. A minister says that the news centers will integrate efforts to tackle the spread of fake news, and they'll create their own coordination center, while each province, that means geographical areas like states, will set up its own fake news center under another department, part of the Interior Ministry. A report by the Bangkok Post reports that when fake news is reported, now here's what happens when fake news happens in Thailand. Watch this. So when fake news is reported, officials have been ordered to immediately alert the public and instruct the Public Relations Department of Thailand to correct the news within 1 hour and to prosecute those responsible for spreading the misinformation.
Hey, Tyler, I've been hearing that the king of Thailand isn't beautiful and smart. I wonder if we can address this fake news right away.
That's absolutely fake news, and I challenge anyone to come forward with any strong.
But Tyler, that's against another law, right?
That's a bit of a separate law, yeah. But the point is, Thailand doesn't play games when it comes to people spreading things online. By the way, people have gone to jail for leaving negative reviews of hotels. Jail, legally, repeatedly.
Hey,
So
this is Elle. I don't see it necessarily as a bad idea because when I was doing projects for public safety, we had to do stuff like that because people, online gamers, I don't know if anybody remember like the doxing and stuff, and people were calling in for bomb threats and stuff like that and saying people, calling it on other gamers. So you end up wasting the police force's time because they have to go out for some type of threat that wasn't even there because that was still like a form of misinformation. They started going after the individuals. So as soon as we get to a point where something really catastrophic happens, which I mean, it does all the time, but something's going to happen soon and they're going to start going after the individuals. And hopefully people learn that freedom of speech, again, because they don't know they don't know the Constitution properly. They don't understand that that's, between them and the government. But as soon as they understand freedom of speech is not freedom of consequence, that's when, none of this stuff is going to, anything that we're talking about right now is not going to be, it's not going to be nothing. Hard things need to happen to people who do this stuff, period.
So can I jump in on, and this is Vinay, on two things. One is on the Thai government thing and the India story that Cal and kind of commented on. Even in India, the government's looking at creative war rooms on tackling misinformation that comes in, reports that come in within 24 hours. On Professor Asif's point, the second point I want to make on the judiciary, if you know anything about the judiciary in some of the countries in Asia, you can go to court to get a decision on any news, but it can take months, if not years, for the judiciary to be able to act on it based on the caseload. And the third point on the platform versus publisher issue, there was an interesting case in India where somebody went to, I think it was Twitter, or took Twitter or Meta to court saying, and when Meta came and said, we're a platform, not a publisher, the person who had filed in court came and said, if you are a publisher, because you are signing exclusive content rights with content creators and publishing that, and you're also charging people to have their content show up first in search or to promote. That's exactly what publishers do. That you're not just a distributor;
Yeah, we're
you're
going to see
also
more of that.
creating
Exactly. That's a
content.
really good point. That directed advertising, that is an affirmative act there. So that's a really another good point to raise.
Yeah, or when you sign on an content creator exclusive to your platform, right? Because that's like a book distributor publisher signing up an author to write a book for them. So are you then a publisher? So I think this platform versus publisher, I don't think the social media companies are helping their case by trying to go more into content. This is Vinay. I'm done speaking.
Well, Vinay, did you have any take on the India's points about? I mean, this is the ongoing drama between India and the big tech companies about. It's. I mean, is there more than meets the eye here? Is this India's making it? This is a difficult ask, by the way. What India is asking of these big tech companies is not easy to do. In fact, it's incredibly difficult to do. And maybe India's going to say, well, we asked you very nice, and it turns out you're not able to do it. So Ku, the little startup here, is able to do it because they're building their platform in that way where it's much more easy to comply with the government, takedown requests and whatnot. And they're smaller, so it's easier to do. And so Twitter, it just turns out, sorry, we tried working with you, and it just turns out that you're not able to do what we need you to do. And we love you, Twitter, and we all love American tech companies and democracy and everything, but you're just unfortunately not able to technically meet the requirements to operate in the state of India. It's been nice, Twitter, but we're going to go ahead and let Ku take it from here. Thank you very much. Oh,
Yeah.
Facebook. So Facebook, go ahead. You were saying, Mr. Zuckerberg, go ahead and finish your statement, please.
Yeah, and I think part of that is last year 21 and to some part for the next 2 months, and then you'll see it again in 24, is election year. Or there are massive state elections happening. And when that happens, there's so much news that's coming out, each political party putting stuff out, memes, there's memes that's going around that's there, and content creators are putting it out. And a lot of that is fake news. And I'm not even taking side of either the government or opposition. Everyone's doing it. And when it gets reported, that's one reason why for a couple of years ago, the Indian government asked every social media company to have the compliance officers whose job is where the public can go and file that I need this content taken down, and they have to investigate it within 24 hours and do it or put a warning or something. The problem is Meta, Twitter, Instagram, all of these guys, the number of complaints that are coming to them, they just have one person they've appointed. They need to hire loads of people to be able to investigate and do it. So by the
Wow.
time they get a case and look at it, it takes like 3 weeks.
Well,
By then it's gone viral.
that could be the other kind of incentive or motive here is India's like, do you need help hiring an additional 20,000 people to help with these takedowns? Because we have those people right here in India for you.
But Tyler, there is another point. I mean,
Hold on,
fake news is one
hold
thing.
on. Clinton had his
Mhm.
hand up over in the Twitter space. Clinton, was your point still relevant?
Actually, it's not. Someone else already brought up the point I was going to bring up, which is why I lowered my hand. But
Okay,
thank you, Tyler.
sure. Go ahead, Karan.
Yeah, so fake news is one thing. One thing we have to realize is just look at the whole pattern. We are actually looking at the, big tech and the social media and all that. But if you look at it like more deeply and analyze the whole situation, exactly what's happening here, basically the governments are losing control, and that's where it's all stemming from. I mean, it used to be like the mainstream media who has got the editorial control. They have the control. They actually fact check. They communicate with the executive branch. They communicate with the judiciary, and then they come up with a story. It's still been happening in the U.S. and the developed world. What is happening over there is the government had like different tactics in terms of the actually controlling different pillars of the actual the whole system. Now they're slowly realizing that they are losing this control, and especially the whole population is pretty much like so empowered that they can actually cannot be budged or like being told by the government that okay, you're going to be actually doing this. So month ago, on the Starlink website is being brought down and saying that you cannot actually get the pre-orders. So that happened in India. Pakistan followed a suit like a week ago. So the moment there's a internet is going to be actually delivered through the satellite, they will lose the control of like actually turning the kill switch. So basically, they're losing the kill switch all along. So they are having a trouble from the perspective that people are getting empowered and they can say whatever they like, whether it be fake or not, whatever, that's the separate debate. But the governments are having an issue that losing a control would ultimately mean that they won't be able to actually control certain elements of what they want to, deploy or like control through the regulations, through the laws, through the constitution, and all that. Because the people can slowly become and go into that direction where that can become like one tweet can actually become a mass movement on the roads, and all of a sudden, like there's going to be, security problem. So that's where they are clamping down. So one way is to do the way China did, and the other way is to do this what India is doing. So we have to look at the perspective. Every government is going to have a dilemma in this way. So we have to look at it from the bigger perspective, apart from this fake news thing that's going to go on for everybody has this problem at hand.
Yeah.
In
By the
some
way,
way, in some ways,
speaking of the news, take a look at Jeff Zucker just resigned as president of CNN. So interesting development there.
Go ahead, Cal.
yeah, no, just yeah, that's a good point, David. That's what in some ways I was thinking, Kuram, just what the Indian government's doing and what the Chinese government doing is very similar in many ways, right? So in some ways, what you're trying to do is to put people you can control in place, right? So if you can't control a
Oh, yeah.
U.S.
Yeah.
tech company, right? You put your own people in, coup, and then you can be damn right the coup CEO is going to be
Right.
controlled by the Indian government, right? In a
Right.
sense, or going to be more, easily influenced in a way by that. So yeah, it's a similar strategy. I don't think it's radically different, right?
Yes.
And the Chinese government just puts a Chinese actor in place and such, and it's much more. One is more transparent and messy looking, but the other one is also messy, but behind the scenes, right? So the whole Chinese thing is quite messy behind the scenes, but effectively they take Jack Ma out and they put all their players in, and now they can implement exactly what they want to do. Similarly, the India's trying to do it, but it's just a lot more transparent.
Yep.
So the fundamental difference, Cal, is basically, the Chinese, because the system is being designed in a way that you have the Politburo, you have like 10,000 people who are actually running it, and the rest of the people are like kind of subjects. So one stroke of a pen, they can say, okay, we are banning crypto. Whole countries, nobody would be able to actually mine or anything, and nobody would be able to actually do anything. India has a bigger problem because the biggest democracy in the world have got this image of progressing, and then all these tech giant CEOs, and the first tier, second tier has been run by the expats and all that, and they cannot do that. They cannot afford to actually have the similar sort of approach what China took. So they are in a dilemma that whether we actually going to be progressing in the mainstream, where we're going to be coming as a progressive nation who has got the biggest democracy and all that. At the same time, we are clamping down on the free speech and we are clamping down on the free internet. I mean, Elon is coming up and saying, I'm going to give you the internet through the satellite. And here the government is saying, no, you cannot. You have to get this license first from the Indian government, and then you can start getting pre-orders. For God's sake, pre-orders. It's not even deployed yet. So that's India has a bigger problem at hand. At the same time, like doing this balancing that this is the biggest democracy in the world, and you can go on really, really whatever you want to say, you can say it, and still yet clamping down and keeping a control over it. And especially yesterday, you were not here, but Rahul Gandhi, when the opposition actually jumps in, and the top guy actually says that Modi government is actually clamping down on Twitter, and doesn't say anything about the Twitter, but says to the Modi administration, that's like a major thing. So that's like a big dilemma here.
Right. For those who missed it, that was one of the news yesterday that from the Wall Street Journal that one of Modi's political opponents, Rahul Gandhi, says that Twitter is unwittingly complicit in Modi's campaign that was limiting Rahul Gandhi's Twitter followers. So you have that was yesterday, an Indian politician who's from the opposition party saying that the reigning party, the leading party, is limiting his Twitter followers. And then today you have the leading party saying you're not doing it enough to limit fake news. Quite an
Hey,
interesting.
hey Tyler, this is
Yeah,
can I just this is Ken. Just one quick sentence, just so we don't have a confluence of things. Someone just mentioned Jeff Zucker resigning. Jeff Zucker resigned because of a workplace romance. It has nothing to do with the issues that we're talking about. I just wanted to make that clear.
unless that's fake news, and then it would have everything to do with what we're talking about, which is fake news.
Plot twist.
Plot twist.
Yeah, I feel like the real problem is the fake news and the lack of consequence, like Elle has been saying, right? And until that has been resolved, it's really
How
hard
about
to
that?
measure.
How about that? I love this idea. Just to try it. What if people, the platforms started scoring you on your sharing of provably true news and giving you, like apps constantly are telling you how well you're doing in different ways, and the platform could tell you, turns out that article that you shared is actually completely false. Did you realize? And here's why. And then your points are going down and down and down and down. And after a while, it says, you know what? You're sharing a bunch of bullshit. Yeah, you should probably
Yeah,
stop
no true
sharing that.
thoughts.
Right.
It's called
Yeah.
upvotes and downvotes, like on Reddit.
Right. Turns out you have low critical thinking skills. Turns out, uh, and so as such, we're not going to really.
Tyler, would that
Yeah,
be an AI that would verify that, or is that from other people that would
yeah.
be
It would be.
doing that?
It would be programmed. Yeah. It would be.
Okay.
It would be algorithmic. We could say.
Okay, good. As long as it's not in the hands of the people, because then it will just, because some people will just vote down just for the sake of voting down.
No, but my point is informing people that they themselves have uh, don't quite have the skills needed to participate in social media, and that if you want to continue to participate, you might want to. Here's how you can improve your scores. Here's how you can detect, the shit from the shinola.
It's kind of like a Tyler Crowley question. How can you authenticate a newspaper article, right? And how good are you? Because
Right.
if you're not doing it too well, you're gonna get a low score. And then
Yeah, isn't there
I like
several
the
websites that do that though? I forgot the fact was it Fact Checker, and there's a couple. So is there any way that we can enlist those websites too? Because I know aggregating and verifying that stuff would be sometimes hard, but if you can pull a bunch of that stuff together into one to and let's have one
yeah,
algorithm go through it.
exactly. And then if you're kind of brainstorming this, you're
Yeah.
you're 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 aiming it at an individual's behavior, right? So
Mm-hmm.
on right, so you're using whatever the credible, I don't know what they are. I don't know how good fact
Oh, can
checker
we
is. Anyone
protect this
else?
idea? Me, Tyler, Cal. Come on, we'll
Yes.
talk in the back channel. Let's work on this.
Who
That
verifies the verifiers? Who
Well, no,
verifies the
it
verifiers?
could be simpler than that. It could be let's just do
Jennifer
a
Weir.
little. Let's do a little geographical quiz, and it turns out you don't know diddly shit about geography, so you should probably keep any kind of international politics out of your feed. And then let's go ahead and look at some other news about history, and it turns out you don't know anything about history whatsoever. So you should probably not comment on anything historical. And it just gives you a reference of self-evaluation so that you realize you are deeply misinformed fundamentally, and that you are not
It helps you
educated.
grow. It helps you
Right,
grow as an individual.
right.
Right.
And then here's steps you could take to actually learn stuff, about the world and science and history and geography and politics and what have you before you start developing opinions. That your opinion is probably worth one on the scale of 1 to 100. Your opinion's worth a one, and we've determined that as a platform based on the scores that you've got from these assessments.
Tyler,
Yeah,
but we believe in one vote, one man, one vote, one
that's
woman, one
that,
vote. So if
maybe
you
we
have,
need to
I
start
know in America
reevaluating.
they don't. I know in America you don't have one man, one vote kind of
Right.
concept.
Representative democracy is precisely why
Yeah,
we put in the representative in the democracy. Yes.
Republican,
Yes.
Republican democracy.
may I chime in something? But here we have this problem because we have this separate group. For example, the elders, they have their own like friends together, have a group. Here we use line. So they have this chat room. So basically, that's how this information was spread. And if you don't have because they are friends, so they trust each other. So anyone shared misinformation, basically they were just like virus, or they were shared with their own friends or families. So if you don't have this kind of AI or this misinformation majors into that kind of level, basically they don't even trust the news. So but a meme picture or a video, basically we all know it's like produced by some people who intentionally did that, and they spread that. So I mean, even the majors, you say, on the public platform, we have the fact check, and we restrict some users for their future information. But still, this kind of level is much more important for people to believe something, because just like, yeah, my parents, their friends share things and they believe immediately. Even we told them, we found a lot of proofs that it's wrong, but they don't believe it.
Right. Well, we can start financially penalizing them, as Thailand will start doing. They're going to penalize people who spread misinformation. I can't wait to see how that plays out. So the next
misinformation as a revenue center.
Yeah, exactly right. We have a new business model, everybody. So the next story is from the Associated Press, that Tesla will issue an over-the-air update for 53,000 cars and SUVs to remove a full self-driving feature that let vehicles roll through stop signs. We covered that yesterday. Next is from The Verge. YouTube rolls out a new interface for its full-screen player on Android and iOS, making it easier to like or dislike a video, view comments, and share while still in full-screen mode. Love that. Next is from Washington Post. Investigation shows that Chinese drone maker DJI, that's no ordinary drone maker, that's the 8,000-pound gorilla of drones, who make fantastic drones, by the way.
Yeah, the best
Kind of out.
newbie drones and professional drones.
There is no second or third or fourth place in this race. DJI is just kind of dominating the drone space for consumers and prosumers. And an investigation shows that DJI, which is based in China, Shenzhen specifically, a leading U.S. law enforcement supplier, obscured investment. Oh, wait a minute. Let me read this again just to make sure it's crystal clear. Investigation shows that Chinese drone maker DJI, a leading U.S. law enforcement supplier, meaning U.S. law enforcement is a buyer of DJI drones, DJI obscured investment from 4 Chinese state-backed groups in recent years, meaning that the state is a notable investor in DJI, which sells to U.S. law enforcement, which means ostensibly wink, wink, nudge, nudge, that China's collecting data in how the U.S. Law enforcement agencies are using their drones. Was that clear?
Well, they're also collecting geographic data. I think that was one of the earlier concerns from last year. So they're getting a lot of metadata. And if the recent Apple Pegasus software is any indication, you can get away with a lot behind the scenes, because these curtains that companies put up as security veils actually do a lot to protect attackers as well.
So, Chinese drone maker DJI, a leading supplier of drones to U.S. law enforcement, obscured its Chinese government funding while claiming that Beijing had not invested in them, according to the Washington Post review. So it's worse. There not only was the investment happening, they were denying it, which makes it obviously worse. According to Washington Post review of company reports and articles posted on the sites of state-owned and controlled investors, as well as analysis by IPVM, a video surveillance research group. The documents show that 4 investment bodies owned or administered by Beijing have invested in the popular drone brand in recent years, including a state asset manager that has pledged to play a key role in promoting partnerships between private enterprises and the Chinese military. Brendan Carr, the senior Republican on the FCC, which oversees all things drones, which authorizes DJI's equipment for use on U.S. communications networks, Labeled, meaning that's how it gets its GPS coordinates, by the way, to be very specific. Labeled reports of links as deeply concerning. The FCC proposed changes last year that could severely limit access to U.S. market for companies deemed a national security risk. Scrutiny of DJI comes as the company is already facing action by U.S. regulators over its ties to Beijing's security apparatus. DJI was among 8 Chinese companies added to the U.S. investment blacklist by the Treasury Department in December over sales of its drone equipment to police in Xinjiang. Oh dear. The Defense Department clarified last year. Who cares? You get the point. So it looks like DJI is going to get kicked out of the U.S. Very properly here, very, very shortly. DJI did not comment on questions about whether Chinese government-controlled funders were investors in the company, but maintained it had not received direct investment from the Chinese government. Okay, right. And you're getting indirect investment, right? Well, because they know if they did it direct.
It's never direct.
Yeah. I didn't kill my wife. What are you talking about? What? Why would I directly kill my wife? What are you talking? Please.
Hey, Tyler, in addition to that, but in addition to that, so the data collection, which is, deeply concerning, I wonder how much our government paid for all those drones that we're now going to consider, lost money because we didn't properly investigate or listen, the departments weren't talking.
Yes. So we got to jump into the next one, and I have to take a 5-minute break in a second. The next one is, Bloomberg says it's new, breaking news, and they have sources, that Facebook is quietly introducing its metaverse vision to conservative think tanks and nonprofits seeking to blunt expected criticism in Washington, D.C. from lawmakers. Let me pin this one to the top. And hopefully this
Tyler, you brought that one up yesterday because those think tanks act as lobbying, and so they're seeding them now to whisper in the ears of, right.
Different story. That was an actual detailed amount that the amounts that big tech, not just Facebook, but Google and others, have doubled their investment in 2021 into these think tanks as a sort of by proxy lobbying approach. And this is totally different. This is a detailed look at how Facebook is doing it, and they're doing it on the topic of the metaverse because they are hoping that these think tanks will convince lawmakers on Capitol Hill that Facebook's metaverse isn't necessarily a bad thing. I will be back in 5 minutes. Can somebody please?
So in some ways, are these kind of it's different because it's more strategic, Jennifer? Is that what they're trying to get at? It's just more rational and trying
It's
to
just,
come up with a
it's a different
strategy.
plan. It's a different path. So, I'm sure a lot of people here have worked in lobbying, and money doesn't go straight through the reported funnels and PACs and everything that everyone reports. Money is given to these people, or influence is done on these people in many, many different ways. Most of it behind the scenes. This is sort of in front of the scenes because at least they're saying they're giving money to these think tanks. And then people, if they're prestigious think tanks, people tend to defer to them. At least the public thinks that they are, intelligent people. But they're just, again, giving them money is, again, buying them off. These people are absolutely people that can be swayed. And then they have an additional layer of sway power with the regulators. Right. I mean, I don't know.
So it's more or less the same thing,
Yeah.
unless
Exactly. It's just another path.
it's just
with a
another
different
way to do that. And I'm wondering like this must be like did anybody watch Veep? So I'm sure a lot of people in the U.S. watch Veep.
Yeah,
A
I
series,
have
yeah.
watched it, but I can't remember it. Yes.
This is like this world in Washington now. I haven't been close in the U.S. here. Must be just immensely sophisticated in this whole world of how they influence and work with all the politicians. Just
I
so
think they
immensely
are and aren't.
sophisticated.
No, they are and aren't. I mean, people just don't see it. It's not that sophisticated, but people don't see it. I mean, it's literally right there. Like if you look up, there's just, as you're saying, there's different people influencing them, and they're expected to vote in certain ways or um, design legislation in certain ways, and whether it's via these think tanks and getting them this way, whether it's giving money to their dentist to take, so that he can take them on a vacation for a month. I mean, it's
I
pretty
remember
straightforward.
I remember the days when we used to you probably remember this, Jennifer or Evan, maybe. Do you remember the internet tax, the the law that I think Bill Clinton brought in that gave the Amazons the advantage, right? The pure internet companies the advantage for a while, rightly so, and then all the physical retailers kind of came in. Ken, you might have a sense of this.
Oh yeah,
Physical
I know
retailers,
I know
yeah,
that well, and
yeah.
it made sense. They just let it sit there for too long, as you point out.
So I was at the other side. Like I'm sitting there at Best Buy, and we're lobbying, right? We're lobbying, not lobbying, but we're trying to convince the government that this is not a fair thing for for us now that the internet companies are up and running, and just because we have stores in these different states, we didn't want to have a disadvantage. We used to have to hustle. We had some basic laws. I remember working with some really smart people in our communications in our government relations group, and there were limitations as to what they could do, and we hustled like crazy. We actually got Robert Stevens, who was the founder of Geek Squad, right? Amazingly creative guy, and we got all the geeks in their Beatles to go around driving around Washington on the day that they would meet to work through these issues. So every time they would do that, they'd just be like traffic jams, and they'll be like,
That's fun.
I think it's in
I mean,
somebody's
ultimately,
newspaper.
it was the states, right, who were losing revenue and really
Yes,
forced the
yeah,
change.
they were,
People don't
yeah.
realize that from other countries, we have a federalist system that divides power between the states and the feds, and there's always tension and arguments about everything, but specifically taxation and that kind of thing. So yeah, the state.
And sales tax in the United States is usually at the state and local level, as opposed to Europe with a national VAT tax. But the one thing, Cal, that I think that the traditional retailers got wrong in terms of not just a question about lobbying and whining and dining, is there was a fundamental issue, and the fundamental issue back then was the way state sales tax are administered. You could have a different sales tax in different cities and different counties within the same state, because that's the way that they've done it, and that kind of is okay when you've got a physical retailer. But at the time, there was no software available for people to easily compute that, what's the difference between the sales tax in Manhattan versus the sales tax in Rockland County, New York. They couldn't do it. Okay, so really the solution, if I had been like your lobbyist, if I had been working for Best Buy in government affairs, what I would have actually suggested as a kind of a compromise is acknowledge that there was a problem doing it for the internet companies at the time, and just tell the states that what they need to do is you need to just assess one sales tax, statewide sales tax, whatever you want to make it on internet retailers, and then you take the money, figure out how you want to go divvy it up among the localities, but don't put an Amazon at the time in the position of having to figure out the sales tax in different counties. It was reasonable to ask them to apply 50 different sales taxes for 50 different states. That was doable even then. Okay, and that was actually the policy fell at the time.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. But
Still complicated. I mean, if I
like this,
shop at Best Buy in New Hampshire, there's zero sales tax versus Best Buy in
yeah,
Massachusetts.
and
There's
also
like
in
five and a half
Florida
percent.
too.
That's a
So
Yeah.
yeah,
different
there's
issue.
still this big different issue, but it still affects retailers
I
pretty
used that. I
dramatically.
was just giving that example. Like, so there is good. I mean, there is everywhere you go, right? Like there's government relations, right? And again, fortuitously, I've had experience in different countries. When in China was interesting. When I was working in China, um, there were I had to follow the what was the U.S. Corruption Act, Jennifer? Not the Bribery Act, the Corruption Act in
It's
the
called
U.S.,
fair
right?
something, right?
Yeah, and basically, I could only give a gift up to $50, right? I mean, that's literally, literally,
Right, but I
if
mean, those are so. Oh my God, they're in every contract. That's another one of my like pet peeves. That language is in every single contract. Yeah, and it's $50 or $25 in certain ones, but yeah, $50, and
so.
then
My
there's
question,
so
my
many so
question
many
is,
ways to get around
when
that,
these
though.
lobbyists
Yeah.
are taking people out for dinner in Washington, right, or doing all this, where does that $50 come in? Like, I mean, why isn't it limited to fifty
No, that's my
dollars?
point. That's my point. So they'll put like 15 names down instead of the two, so that it looks like it was a
Oh, I
$50
see.
gift.
Right.
So they can do that. They can also. I'm not kidding. I didn't come up with that dentist example out of the air. I did work with a firm, and we would give certain state representatives, dentists, a ton of money, and allegedly the dentist is taking his family. Why would you give your dentist a bunch of? Anyways, for him to take the lobbyist, the representative on a wine weekend or something, or to, to their
and
sister to take them out.
just
Yeah,
internationally, I just want to say, like, I look
yeah,
so cheap. I looked so cheap, right? In China, people give really nice, well thought out presents to each other, right?
Yeah,
In business, it's part of the custom.
Japan as
And I
well.
was giving this like
well, that's another good
$50.
example, is that it's different countries. Cal, to your point, different countries have different customs, right, and different ways of doing business. And so I had to enforce some of that at one of my companies, because we were doing business in China, and our team over there, turns out, was getting into this bribery stuff. But and how exposed were we, and we had to kind of rein them in, but that pulled us out of doing business because that's the custom and practice there, right? So how much are we going to enforce our U.S. Standards on them, and how much is that done under the radar or behind the scenes? So there's a lot of different aspects there, to your
Yeah,
point.
well, one little example on that before we probably move on to the next headline. I don't know if Cheryl, do you have the next headline up there, or Tyler's probably back?
Yeah,
But just one more example. Oh, you're back. Sorry, that's good. Just one example I'll give you was really really interesting in this whole China thing. When we were shutting down the stores in China, like that was a big political exercise, right? We had to, and also just to our customers and everything. And so I was managing the relationship with the Beijing government, right? But interesting, the law is the basic, because it's a public U.S. company. I could not tell the Chinese government that we were doing this, right, in Shanghai, that we were going to be shutting down the Best Buy store, right? I could not tell them that. However, it was also totally insulting if I did not let them know that something was going to happen that was going to cause some form of disturbance, right, in Shanghai, right? And so interesting dilemma, right, in that particular thing. And then when we did close it, and I managed that in a kind of nuanced way, but when we did close the stores, we had a lot of the competitor had put a rumor out there that people weren't going to get their money back, right, on the and we were like going to give like double the money back on the gift cards, right? But some competitor had put a note out in a local Chinese newspaper and everything. So all this is classic Chinese business. And so there were a lot of people gathering, right? And so I had the Shanghai mayor call me up in my hotel room and say, like, this is not acceptable, right? We might we might need to send some people and do this, and we can. I said, well, you guys have some security people. Could you help us? We had a good relationship with them, and we said, send up security people. And he said, yeah, and it'll cost us $100 each, right, for their lunch. And so there I was calling our ethics committee back at Best Buy to try and get the approval on the $100 because it's more than the $50. But anyway, it's a little example. We move on.
Okay, next up is that Sony does their earnings report. Gaming revenue dropped 8% year over year. Overall profits rose 12% year over year. And the PS4 had sold more at this point than the PS5. Sony shipped just 3.9 million PS5 consoles in its all-important holiday quarter. Then there's a whole bunch of funding announcements as usual. Which ones are particularly interesting, we'll circle back to. But we get to go into the tweets that everyone's been sharing, and there's some particularly good tweets in no particular order. Jeff G shares one that a new Chinese supersonic aircraft will fly from Beijing to New York in 1 hour. Yeah. Space Transportation said its hypersonic aircraft will fly in suborbital space at 2,600 miles per hour to connect any two cities on Earth in an hour. And Netta shares one from that an update on the drama between Elon Musk and the youngster who was tracking his private plane, where Elon offered $5,000 for him to stop that. And the youngster countered with, how about $50,000? And now Elon Musk has blocked that teenager on Twitter. So I think that's the conclusive answer to that question. And then the next one is from Joe Williams, that a startup is being criticized for saying that it can reconstruct faces from DNA. An Israeli AI company claims it can create a model of a face using DNA that can then be fed into a facial recognition system. And now they're receiving some criticisms of that very difficult to demonstrate claim, obviously. And then the next one's from Evan from the Wall Street Journal. titled, very cleverly titled, VR to the ER. Metaverse early adopters prove accident prone. Tally includes broken vases, dislocated shoulders, injured girlfriends. Why don't you go to the gym like a normal person? The girlfriends in the article are saying.
That's hilarious. And I wonder if the fitness ones are giving warnings that they have to check with their doctor before they try those exercises.
Yeah. The next is really interesting from Jeff G. from Nikkei, Japan, one of my favorite publications globally, certainly in Asia. That Omicron variant, according to some guy named George Soros, who may or may not know a thing or two about China, where he's been called the son of the devil himself by the CCP and an economic terrorist by the CCP. George Soros also criticized BlackRock for investing in China recently, saying they can kiss that money goodbye. George Soros now says that the Omicron variant threatens to be Xi Jinping's undoing. He tried to impose total control, but he failed, George Soros says. And indeed, the Omicron variant is so virulent, if that's the correct word, John, please correct me, that it's difficult to control in the way that China is used to controlling the previous variants like Alpha and Delta and whatnot. And he might be right that if it gets out, once the cat's out of the bag, there won't be a way to get it back in. And the places, just looking at Sweden, for example, where it's going berserk, and yet everybody's more or less triple vaccinated, at least double vaccinated, and a lot of people are triple vaccinated, and so it's manageable. The problem is that the Chinese vaccines aren't really as up to snuff on dealing with Omicron, so they are overly reliant on this geographical constraint approach to controlling the spread of the virus, which is just incredibly difficult to do with such a high R0 factor. Anyway, so
but the thing is that the vaccines help reduce spread, but the kinds of things that China is better than anybody else at doing really stop it.
Right. Well, it's reached Beijing, and that's been their worst case scenario.
The worst time for the Winter Olympics.
Right. Well, I mean, at least the games will go on. But will it lead to such havoc that it will threaten Uncle Xi? We'll know very soon. We'll know in the next month. So, but George Soros is saying so. That's quite interesting. The next is from Ken Frankel, who joins us each day on stage here from the Wall Street Journal, that the new clues about who will develop long COVID. Scientists are gaining a better understanding about why some people get long COVID and others do not. Research is homing in on risk factors for developing long COVID, offering clues for potential treatments. And I imagine you read this one, Ken. Any quick thoughts?
I'd always rather have Ellie comment on this stuff than me. So, I mean, I've read it, but I mean, I just forwarded it out. I mean, you can. I mean, my analysis of it won't be any better than any other civilian.
It turns out this is an ideal opportunity to play our favorite
What?
show. So hold on.
Asthma.
Hold on.
Okay.
What are the common risk factors identified in a new study as potentially making someone a greater risk for developing long COVID?
Asthma.
Smoke.
Obesity.
Obesity, yeah.
Asthma,
Obesity.
obesity, and
Inflammation in
diabetes.
the body.
Diabetes.
Catching COVID.
Hard to argue with that last one.
No mask.
Certainly a risk
Asthma.
factor. Yes. As Dr. Francine seems to already know, perhaps she's read the article. Indeed, the first word of the article is asthma. Number 2 is unhealthy gut bacteria. Number 3 is the presence of autoantibodies usually associated with autoimmune conditions. These are among the risk factors identified in a new study as potentially making someone at greater risk of developing long COVID, a condition in which wide-ranging symptoms such as fatigue, Brain fog and a racing heart rate persist months after the initial infection.
You know, this is like there needs no ghost come from the grave to tell us that, Tyler. Asthma is a disease, it's an airway disease. It's a hyperactive airway disease. COVID is a respiratory virus. It's a virus of the airways. If, you know, once someone with asthma has their airways irritated, it takes a longer time for them to calm down. So I don't, and I've also read the research about obesity. It's because the virus lives in fat cells. So
Right.
all of these seem so obvious.
Well,
Well, to make a slight modification, the virus can be seen as a respiratory virus, but a lot of the evidence that's coming out suggests that it's also a vascular virus, meaning that it affects our circulatory system and our blood vessels, which is even more concerning given the demographics of, for example, the United States and obesity.
it also says
By the
some.
way, there was a doctor in a hospital in New York, just an ordinary doctor, who identified that vascular issue in the early stages of COVID, and he was, dismissed by a lot of his colleagues because he was seeing that they were, the overusing, in his view at the time, those respirators, because they're treating it just like it's a respiratory problem, but it was actually an inflammation problem. So, I mean, that is very, I mean, that's not even new. I think now that I think that's accepted.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that delay or that lag, it's interesting to note how Spotify, for example, is addressing some of the misinformation from the Joe Rogan podcast. But Joe's response was, hey, remember all those things they told us before that would get you taken off of a platform? Well, those are now established or understood. For example, vaccination. Vaccinated people still spread the virus, perhaps at a different window and perhaps to a lesser extent, but that still happens. But if you said that early on, you were censored. So I think the idea of censorship is a very delicate matter, especially when we're talking about medicine and people's lives.
Well, but actually, the
That
facts
that, that goes
have
to another
changed.
article that was written by UC San Diego before vaccines and everything came out that said just the spike protein alone could be the source of the inflammation process. And the guys who did the paper, and I know it was reviewed by, it wasn't peer reviewed yet, and I'm going back to see if somebody's actually going in to re-review that study. But it said that there would be spikes in cardiovascular issues and diabetes predicted by that study. So, to Eric's point, what once was taboo to say is now acceptable and reasonable to think about.
But the thing is, the facts did actually change with changing variants, because how much there was breakthrough infection increased markedly from beta to delta to obviously Omicron.
The unhealthy gut bacteria is an interesting new addition in my that I would love to get more information and detail on that.
Hey, so
Yeah,
Ellie, on,
but
on,
do you
on the
get?
gut factor thing, I don't know or if John's on. I see John. I don't know if he's listening. Would that make sense with Omicron for people, whether you have it or not, maybe as a prophylactic, to take some probiotics just in case?
You'd have to be careful on which probiotics, because I think that one of the main factors would be IL-6. That's a particular molecule that the immune system uses in signaling, and it's a really important molecule in severe COVID disease. Some probiotics can actually increase that. It's really, you have to drill down into a lot more details. I think Aram would be able to say more about that than I do, since the gut microbiome is one of the things she's really focused on.
Yeah, I will tell you, your gut biome is so important. Like when I went MIA earlier last year, it was because of my gut and some antibiotics I was on for my eyes. And I will say that the doctor was explaining to me, as well as several articles, that there's like a lot of a lot of the health issues we have all starts in our gut, and making sure that our gut is healthy. So all I can do is, please guys, read up on all of that stuff regarding your biome, because it's highly important to the way the rest of your body works.
Okay, so the next tweet is, well, that was Ken's about the new clues about who will develop long COVID. Yep, people with asthma and bad gut bacteria. And then the next is from BB, again from Nikkei Japan, about China. China inks nuclear power plant deal with Argentina. The builder hails the deal as a milestone in nuclear ties between the two countries. And state-owned China National Nuclear Corp has signed a contract in Argentina to build a nuclear project using China's Hualong 1 technology. Okay. Next is also from BB, from Reuters, that self-driving car companies zoom ahead, leaving U.S. regulators behind. Self-driving vehicle companies from Tesla to General Motors are racing to start making money with their technology, outrunning efforts by regulators. As is usual, innovation goes far faster than regulators do. So that's to be expected. The next one, also from BB. She's on a roll. From the BBC, you know, I love it when that happens. The cyber attack strikes German fuel supplies. Reports suggest loading and unloading systems are paralyzed, but extent of the issue is not yet known. A major fuel supplier in Germany is operating at limited capacity after a cyber attack disrupted IT systems over the weekend. Oil tanking Deutschland stores and transports oil, vehicle fuels, and other petroleum products. And I'm kicking myself that I didn't predict that would happen in this lead up to Ukraine. As it's a huge mystery which country these hackers might be operating from.
It's not only the direct attacks, which that may be, but also the indirect attacks. So some of the big, huge, like the big Merck settlement that I think we saw for 1.5 billion with their insurance, that was from also a Russia/Ukraine activity. The not Petya, I think is the malware. But again, these things bleed out into the rest of the world, and so Russia-Ukraine activities. That's why the U.S. has been told to be on higher alert. It's not that they're necessarily going to have direct attacks. It's that whatever they release on each other can bleed over to here in our systems.
Mm-hmm. The next is from Dr. Fran, that a animation studio called Spire has raised $20 million from others, including Epic Games. Very interestingly. Why is Epic Games investing in an animation studio? Well, this is no ordinary animation studio. Spire aims to produce animated films for the metaverse. Now you're seeing this convergence between film and video games is getting blurrier by the minute there.
I mean, it's no
I want
surprise
to
there.
just
They did it with the game Defiant.
arcane.
Back,
Yeah,
yeah, about 10 years ago, there was a game called Defiance, and Sci-Fi was produced, the Sci-Fi Channel, which is the science fiction channel here in the US. They were producing TV content that tied into the video game, which was one of the first times it happened. So every week when there was a new TV show, that you would play that episode in the video game. And it was also the first one of the first multiplayer platforms at all. So it's been going on for a while. I think it's just everybody's now
yeah,
catching on, especially with these game trailers. They, one of my friends who's from the game, she works for Bend, I think it's on Bend Video, and they have a bit of, they do like a lot of the trailer creation and stuff for these, but they're pretty much movie-like, and that's how you draw a lot of the gamers in, by creating these almost like movie-like experiences and these real scenes while you're playing the video game. So it's no surprise that everybody's finally catching on.
Okay.
yeah. I want to add to that
Yeah, and
because that's like
one
totally
comment
in
about
line
Epic Games though,
with
in terms of like
everything.
animation
Hold
in a
on,
game engine,
Eric. Hold
it's
on,
actually very
Eric.
difficult and
Oh,
very tedious.
hold on,
Sorry.
Eric. Hold on a second.
Hang on, guys. Hang on.
Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. I want to be able to complete your point today. Yeah, just for that, Epic Games just done Arcane, right? So that's based off another game that they've done. So Epic Games going into multimedia, and obviously, just as El said as well, when you're talking about the cinematics that go into creating these reels and in-game experiences that are visual, such as you would find in Call of Duty and any other game that is pretty much out right now, they are pretty much the backbone for the experience of when it comes to storytelling in a lot of these games. And I have a lot of friends that do those type of work, and also obviously doing the animation work for particular characters. And Epic Games is pretty much a forerunner in this particular space. They do some of the best work for the cinematics, and that's just in my personal opinion, right? But when it comes to them getting Spire, I'm not so sure on what Spire does particularly, but getting around the funding is quite of a big deal, right? So I'm gonna look more into that. But as to what Epic Games is doing, it's finding these particular companies that want to do these cinematics, which is quite expensive. It's just as expensive as doing a film, right? So whether it's a short film or a feature length film, it's still gonna have the same level of intensity within the studio. So having these companies that want to do the games, right, which wasn't the same thing 10 years ago. 10 years ago, it was either you do film or you do games. And right now, it's great that the line is blurred and you can go from film to games and games to films. So having a company that wants to work in that particular niche area, and it's quite a very very niche area because it needs a lot of skill and a lot of understanding of the game experience in and around itself. So that particular Spire, them having films within the industry is, yeah, it's a big deal for Epic Games.
Okay, over to you, Eric, in Twitter Space.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry about the speaking over you. I guess the reception wasn't as
It's all
good as
good.
It's just a delay.
I would have hoped.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about animation, like I've used Unreal Engine since about 2015. We originally used it for visualizing genome data in a game engine, which is kind of crazy. But back then, animation was actually quite difficult. It was tedious in the same way that it was in any sort of animation software. But now we see with the advent of real-time filmmaking, like The Mandalorian and other productions, it's still a little bit tedious. So Epic has to compete with someone like Unity, who has weather, and any way that they can make animation a much easier entry into filmmaking, I think that not only produces more cinematic experiences, but also makes them much less costly. Like it used to require 250 people to make a AAA game. But now you can do that with a team probably the size of, a dozen or a couple of dozen folks because the tools have gotten so much better. So the acceleration for tools development, specifically in animation, is a good direction. And I think it's going to produce a lot of interesting films. We can see somebody like James Cameron with the Avatar movies. He was doing all of these amazing technologies that we saw a decade later in game engines. So in anticipation of the next, I guess, revolution in filmmaking, we can see that these two technologies come much closer. So it's a very exciting time for content creators and storytellers. Really exciting.
Okay, next up is an article from Protocol. Who owns your address in AR? Probably not you. One day, we will all don AR glasses capable of serving up information geospatially tied to every house and place in our neighborhoods, but who will own and control these spatial AR layers? It's the stuff of nightmares. The other day, I found my property occupied by a stranger who was renting it out Airbnb style. The good news is I'm okay. I wasn't actually evicted from my own house, at least not in this world. Somebody had acquired my property in Upland, a blockchain-powered game that allows people to buy, develop, and rent out and sell virtual land parcels based on real-world property borders. It's a bit like Monopoly, played on top of Google Maps, with virtual land speculation happening on a gamified version of the real world. With bright and colorful imagery and goofy-looking Llama as a mascot, Upland emphasizes that it's all fun and games. That's true for its economy as well, as most of its in-game transactions have little to no monetary value in the real world. The person who bought my property currently makes the equivalent of 4 cents a month in Upland's in-game currency by renting it out to other players. However, Upland has big ambitions, which include eventually expanding into AR and providing its data via APIs to third-party developers who may one day be able to build their own game and non-game applications with it, and the company is not alone. A small but growing number of startups and crypto initiatives have begun selling and renting out AR spaces tied to real-world addresses. One day, these efforts could be key to telling your smart glasses which information to display as you look at a famous landmark or even your neighbor's home. This brings up a ton of questions. Who should have the rights to an AR layer tied to a physical address? What does it mean that these AR properties are being divided up among early adopters before most people even know they exist? Will we see the same issues that have plagued real world real estate, including gentrification and displacement, replicated in AR? And on a more personal level, what should I do about my virtual squatter?
Tyler, this is a very interesting topic because if we just take a step back to the year of 2016 when Pokemon Go pretty much took kids and adults to businesses, museums, parks. You had essentially people invading different areas that were either public or private. And now we take it to the modern era. They actually own virtual land in an application called Superworld, and it's in a location where there's a Pepsi sign. So that I chose that specific place because I think like long term that I can possibly either work with Pepsi Cola or whatever to activate there, but also like to put my NFTs there for people to either see or just visit them, interact with them in augmented reality. But this whole aspect of who actually owns like the property, land or that location is going to be very interesting because ultimately it's going to be the application that wins out. Nobody really has the sort of the rights or the patents to the coordinate system, and so anybody can really develop an application on the blockchain using this mechanism and approach. So we see Superworld being one of those. This other company that you just mentioned is also taking that approach. Google could even, come out tomorrow and literally do this. Snapchat is sort of doing a variation, a non NFT variation of it, where you're able to actually put augmented reality lenses at specific locations. And even Instagram and Facebook are dabbling into that area. They actually mentioned it during their Connect 2021 conference that they're going to do like scavenger hunts at particular parks or monuments. So the whole idea of like who owns this, that's going to be a very tricky question, especially when it comes to blockchain and you have people invading different businesses and public areas.
Would it be
I
appropriate?
can.
Hold
Oh,
on
go
one
ahead.
second. Is it an appropriate analogy or metaphor in the example of fantasy sports where JT and Eric and Messi and Cheryl and everybody are doing fantasy sports and they have LeBron James on their team, and then LeBron James says, I'm on somebody's team. They've recruited me and I have no idea who they are. And the point
Well,
is,
Tyler, it's more about like
my point
the
that
the
it's
simple use cases like anchoring a 3D object in augmented reality. But I think where the true value is going to come into play is really the gamification. The way pretty much Pokemon Go did it, they masterfully took a concept and it made it very popular. So when you take the sports example, and you gamify sort of the aspect of being able to collect NFTs or tokens or whatever the case is that you're able to redeem in the future, building that out at scale is going to be an interesting model that I think a lot of companies are going to start to incorporate, especially when we have a company like Niantic that has very robust augmented reality features, ability to anchor objects and create gamified experiences that are real time, persistent, and shared. And they have NFT integration. They actually worked with a platform on the music side to integrate NFTs in this tokenized collectible mechanism and system. So that's going to be a very interesting model to keep an eye on because it speaks to the physical metaverse opposed to the virtual metaverse, which physical metaverse is more real life, enhancing your actual reality, getting you to go outside and enjoy life, but in a very experiential way.
Yeah,
Hey, this is
my
Al. I was
my
going to say
point
we dealt.
is where
go ahead, L, and then
oh
we're going to
so
go to Jason back in Twitter space. Go ahead, L.
yeah.
Okay, yeah, I wanted to say so we dealt with this where I live because especially with Pokemon Go, because I do physical security outside of Clubhouse, or I did for them rolling out different technology, and this was one of my things we had to handle because we had players going up to the police stations, to the detention centers, and places where they're not supposed to be, where these things were. So we had our lawyers actually reach out to Niantic and tell them to remove these areas from that. So I think ultimately it's going to be left up to the counties, the states to intervene. So it's not going to be, the application is going to win. I mean, government is going to eventually win, is going to win out, because some of these areas, just because it's like kind of open access doesn't mean it's open access for all. Because we had people just walking up to the private area where we store the police cars. There was one where, we the asset seizures, that's where we've seized things from, drug dealers and other busts. There was a location that it's in the middle of nowhere and it's unmarked, but Niantic had players going there when it's off limits. So ultimately the government, if it gets out of hand, will win.
Yeah, I want to talk about this from the other angle, right? Which is where in the UK we have this thing called a TV license. So to look at anything anywhere, you need to pay for the TV license to the BBC. And much like that in film, we have to pay just licensing fees to look at anything anywhere. So if you are filming something outside, obviously you have to get the proper papers in order. But also aside from that, if Tesco's is in, or let's say even Best Buy, just for like a one-to-one reference, if a supermarket is in the background, you have to actually sign off on that to make sure that you're allowed to have that sign in the movie. And much like that with the Pokemon Go esque type feature of people, or should I say companies, being able to put people in places, I would see a world where they would have to pay virtual licensing fees, because regardless of anything, these spaces are owned by private companies. And if you're rebuilding, replicating, or creating a marketing scheme around it, the company would want a piece of that pie, because, or even the government, depending on who owns the land, right? So when it comes to people going to monuments and, teleporting to other places, it's more of a who owns the land and who owns the rights to this feature on the real life soil, or should I say real estate. So it's an interesting place to play in, and from the film and creator perspective, I understand it a little bit differently.
Okay, so Jason has his hand up in Twitter Space. Go ahead.
Yeah. So for the experts that are in the room, JT and some of the other ones, Ella, I know you do work in the space as well. But what's the difference to say any geographic location where you want to anchor something could be created in any company's um, package, right? If I go into my phone right now, I can pull up Google Maps or I can pull up Apple Maps, and they both show me the streets that I'm at. And if I had the data from Apple and wanted to create, any VR content or AR content that I wanted that's actually like in the real universe, uh, why couldn't Google do the exact same thing? Like, let's say they wanted to put some piece of AR content above my house, and Apple decided they wanted to do the same thing, but they wanted it to say something different. Uh, I think that people get confused that there has to be one metaverse when there's really a bunch of metaverses, right? And different options. And it could be the exact same place, the exact same location. Pokemon Go places their tokens and and has the people go to these specific areas. But if I go to Google Maps, which is basically the same thing, it's a virtual world that's been created and sometimes with pretty decent graphics. And maybe it's moving into 3D now. What's to say that can't exist as well?
It's not
Yeah,
saying hi.
a
This is
good
Ellis.
use
I'm saying it.
case.
Oh, oh,
Yeah,
you can go ahead.
I just wanted to say a quick use case, which was imagine let's say a big company saying to Pokemon Go, why don't you put a legendary Pokemon here, and then you get a lot of footfall to this particular location or to this particular cafe. So it could come out of the marketing budget and the licensing agreement to that. But virtual licensing agreements is starting to sound really interesting to me.
Yeah, I was going to say, just speaking from the case I gave about the police department and the asset seizure location. I mean, it's just different because I mean certain locations, especially that one in particular. When you look at Google Maps or any of it, like you don't see it on there. You can see that there's something there, but you don't know what it is, and they can't go in there. So I think it just depends on how much pushback those organizations receive. Until there's enough people getting pissed off or enough government entities getting upset about something, they'll just keep going for it. So it's just how much the people will protest. The Google sort of thing, the Google Maps has a practical use. If you need to figure out how to get to this particular police department or you need to get somewhere, that makes sense. But there's no reason why a player needs to go to an asset seizure location or a place where Vice is located. There's no reason for those places to be on the map. They're supposed to be unmarked, just like the federal buildings in DC and the IRS buildings that are around. Most of those federal buildings are unmarked. Like a lot of people don't know, there's several federal buildings in New Carrollton, and there's one in Suitland, and they're in very unassuming areas that no one knows. So that's where the issue comes in. If they start marking those buildings, then they start losing their anonymity. And if that happens, that's when the government steps in. So it would behoove them just not to do things for the sake of doing it, because then you're going to end up getting pushback, and that's when you're going to get restrictions and other restraints, and just need to be smarter about the things that they put out there in the metaverse, even down to people's identities. Just because someone is a celebrity, they still ultimately own their image and they have the right to it. So it's not up to us to be able to, I mean, we don't own them. They own their image, they own their persona. So just because we know them and they have some type of celebrity status doesn't mean we have access to them, and they should be paid accordingly to that. So I think as we go forward in the future and we're building and stuff, we need to encourage people to have at least some type of moral compass when it comes to things. I'm Ellen, I'm done speaking.
Thanks, El. Messi, is your room starting in 10 minutes?
Yep.
Okay,
Yes.
great. So we've got 20 headlines to do in 10 minutes. Let me go through them very quickly. New Music Express, NME, a major music publication out of the UK, has the article that Roblox says artists meaning musicians, won't need to play in real life to sustain successful careers, implying that musicians are going to be touring in Roblox. And as somebody who had a previous life as a touring musician, give me a freaking break. Yeah, you might be able to make something. So far, I would love to see any evidence of people will be able to make something. The really big artists will be able to make considerable amounts. Yeah, let's see what happens. The next is from David Crace that Tope Owatonna, the Nigerian-born founder of Calendly, which I'm a very happy user of myself, raises $350 million. Calendly, the scheduling platform founded by Nigerian-born Tobe Awatana, has raised $350 million. Fantastic for him. That's great. Next is from Thomas Tong. Using deep learning to find genetic causes of mental health disorders. And I just retweeted it to the Tech News Twitter account, as we do with all these articles, and it says, properly diagnosing mental disorders can be challenging, especially for toddlers who are unable to complete questionnaires. This challenge has been particularly acute in understudied minority populations. Past genomic research has found several genomic signals for a variety of mental disorders, with some serving as potential therapeutic drug targets. Deep learning algorithms have also been used to successfully diagnose complex diseases like ADHD. However, these tools have rarely been applied in large populations of African American patients. In a unique study, the researchers generated a whole genome sequencing data from 4,000 plus patient blood samples of African American patients, including 1,384 patients who had been diagnosed with at least one mental disorder. This study focused on 8 common mental disorders, including ADHD, depression, anxiety, autism, intellectual disability, speech language disorders, so blah, blah, blah. The long-term goal of the work is to learn more about specific risks for developing certain diseases in African American populations and how to potentially improve health outcomes by focusing on more personalized approaches to treatment. Quote, most studies focus only on one disease. A minority populations have been very underrepresented in existing studies that utilize machine learning to study mental disorders. Says the researcher here, we wanted to test this deep learning model on the African American population to see whether it could accurately differentiate mental disorder patients from healthy controls, and whether we could correctly label the types of disorders, especially in patients with multiple disorders. to me, the bigger, more interesting thing is like the startup that I'm working with out of Stockholm called Arcus AI, which is this ever-growing database of genes and disorders, which you can get notified in real time whenever a lab or a clinic or a team figures out another one of these matches of a gene with a disorder, and they can notify you if you have the gene that's now been determined to potentially result in a disorder that you don't yet have. Then you could then take preemptive corrective measures, for ideally, regardless of your whatever race or multiple races or age or sex or whatever, irregardless.
Even
Could
if
you
you're a
add the
lazy
article,
baby.
please?
Yeah, especially if you're a baby. That the sooner you know, the better.
Could you tweet out the article, please?
Tweet out the article. I already did. Yeah, from Thomas Strong.
Oh,
Oh, sorry, I didn't. Thank you. I thank you for making me double check. Now it's retweeted. Thank you. The next one is from DeepMind, the AI lab out of London, which Google acquired, which is often thought of as the most prestigious globally. A DeepMind team introduces something called AlphaCode, a system that can compete at average human level in competitive coding competitions. An exciting leap in AI problem-solving capabilities combining many advances in machine learning. So now, this DeepMind's new AlphaCode claims to be able to code as well as a human coder, which means we are days, maybe months, probably not years away from replacing all human coders.
So we should do philosophy. Kids should do philosophy.
Until we have AI philosophers, which are right over the horizon.
Yeah.
Yes. DeepMind says its new AI coding engine is as good as an average human programmer, which, by the way, cost about, I don't know, $150,000 a year. AlphaCode is good, but not great, not yet. DeepMind has created the system called AlphaCode that it says writes computer programs at a competitive level with human programmers. The Alphabet subsidiary tested its system against coding challenges used in human competitions and found that its program achieved an estimated rank, placing it within the top 54% of human coders, better than average. The result is a significant step forward for autonomous coding, says DeepMind.
being better than average is quite good, fairly. Depending on what it would be coding, then it could actually be used today.
Right. Well, the question is how long before it gets to the top 99 percentile?
But why should we let it? Why don't we just let it do menial tasks? I mean, it's cool that it can code and stuff, but I mean, just have it. I mean, we should be having AI to do the things that are tedious and the things that take time away and just leave the humans to create and just work on other stuff. I don't know. We're always creating stuff to replace
Some
and
would
not
argue
stuff
that
to
the coding is the tedious bit, that the creation.
Yeah,
I don't think so. I know a lot of people that really enjoy coding.
Yeah.
there would be more people who would want to make apps if it was easier, much like websites, right?
How much Cheeto
Wix.
dust does that person have on their lap?
Say that again?
I think it also depends on the kind of coding. I think everyone, regardless of your capabilities, there is an example of boring coding, and then there's exciting coding when you're doing something
Exactly.
non-tedious
Okay,
or
Eric,
not something trivial.
Eric,
And the trivial stuff usually has obscure syntax and other things like that. So,
pardon me. We've now got 2 minutes before Messi opens her room, and I've still got 12 tweets to go. So here we go from Alex Garza. Coming soon, question mark, climate lockdowns. The proclaimed crisis of climate change appears ready to become the new COVID that governments will use as an excuse to impose their will because they've whet their appetite in their newfound powers of cracking down on people during COVID. And the question is, will they use climate change as a convenient excuse to impose further restrictions to expand their powers? This isn't a right-wing fever dream. Calls for harsh government measures in the name of saving the environment are already in the parlance of influential organizations and figures. In November 2020, the Red Cross proclaimed that climate change is a bigger threat than COVID and should be confronted with the same urgency. Bill Gates recently demanded drastic measures to prevent climate change, claiming it would be worse than the pandemic, despite millions of people having died from COVID. Blah, 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 blah. You get the idea. What would climate lockdowns look like? Most likely, cities and states would begin a gradual and discreet ramp up of restrictions during the early days of the pandemic. Millions of Americans work from home. This could become the permanent norm if special carbon taxes are put in place. You get the idea. Will governments start enforcing restrictions to climate clampdowns, so to speak?
There's a huge difference between a stay-at-home order and a carbon tax making gasoline more expensive.
Fair enough. Hybrid cars light on fire more often than electric cars, or gas-powered cars combined. So that's an interesting dinner party data point. Electric cars from GM and Tesla get the most attention for fires, but hybrids burn up much more often. And Valerie shares this one from the Wall Street Journal that the Biden administration is moving to address security risks from TikTok. Did you hear that, everybody? Did you hear that? Did you hear it? Did you hear that? Did you hear that? 8 months after it revoked former President Trump's order aiming at barring the video sharing platform, the Biden administration is moving to address security risks from TikTok. The U.S. Department of Commerce looking to manage security concerns. Apps like TikTok would have to submit to third-party auditing. Even if this becomes a regulation, it would take time to implement in order to have impact on security risks. But that's potential progress.
Yeah, certain things like this should be bipartisan, and I just start talking about politics. But when Trump first put that into the air, it was like an uproar, and I know a lot of people that started using TikTok just in spite of that. Now we know so much more about TikTok that it almost seems like a premonition, right? And someone was doing the right thing, but away from that, anyways.
So a quick COVID breathalyzer could allow mass screening in public places. According to experts, bringing an end to the pandemic will require rapid screening of people attending large gatherings, such as conferences and sporting events. And now there's a new potential COVID breathalyzer that could allow mass screenings in near real time. Great. And Katerina has this one, that iron accumulation in the body is linked with age-related cognitive decline. A breakdown in regulatory mechanisms causes iron to build up in the brain during aging, increasing oxidative stress and increasing the risk of age-related cognitive decline. So stop sucking on iron objects. And the next one's from JT, that Snapchat and Oz and Universal Pictures host a virtual J-Lo concert. Fantastic. And the next is from Evan, who says China's finely crafted web of digital surveillance for the Beijing Olympics has been years in the making. The 2020 Winter Olympics are an opportunity for the government to upgrade already extensive tools to track and control the population. And the next is from Evan from Reuters, that robots marched on in 2021 with record orders by North American firms. More robots joined the U.S. workforce last year than ever before, taking on jobs from plucking bottles and cans off conveyor belts at trash recycling plants. I still remember that video. That is one of the most amazing videos that I've seen as part of tech news around the world. I don't know. You guys remember this? Cal might remember it. It was a good one. It was a video. It was a conveyor belt of garbage, and these robotic arms were picking out the bottles at a speed that would blow your mind. I could not believe the speed. And it's got machine object detection recognition, and it knows what a plastic bottle looks like. That's a rather simple algorithm, and it's holy cow were those arms picking that stuff out insanely fast. Anyway, the next one is from PT Yoder, that a cause of America's labor shortage is millions of people with long COVID. As many as 30% of people with COVID develop the long-term illness, with many sufferers struggling to return to work. Watch out for Omicron. Here it comes. The next is from Amay, that Google's CEO says that the company is looking at the blockchain. Watch out. Here comes Google aiming for the blockchain. And the next is from Shumba, who I forgive me, Shumba, I don't know who that is in our audience. But he found one of the most interesting articles we've ever seen, which we happened to have read yesterday, which was the AI nanny being created by Chinese scientists to grow babies in robot wombs. And holy cow, is that one of the wildest articles? And it was reported in South China Morning Post yesterday. Very openly, publicly, Chinese scientists saying we are now growing embryos in robotic wombs, and there's little AIs to monitor the growth and the health of the embryos in these robotic wombs. And I'm still kind of reeling from that one from yesterday.
Hey Tyler, I know you're rushing through and it's super boring topic on the blockchain, but the blockchain is a technology that's in use in many companies and many platforms in many different ways. There's no the same as there's no the metaverse. So I don't know what that article is about. I'm sure Google uses blockchain in different implementations, but just wanted to raise that.
Well, it reminds me of the there's a quick joke in that movie with Owen Wilson when he and what's his partner in crime, where they go and become interns at Google, and they keep saying on the line, how we get on the line.
Oh, I know that. That was so funny.
I love the
On the line.
on the line. Let's get
on the
everyone
on the blockchain. On the
on the
blockchain.
line. Yes, on the blockchain. Yes. Instead of online, it's on the line. Everyone should be on the line. So the next one is from I don't know who, and it doesn't matter because my browser just froze. So there we go. So that's the end, because I have 3 tabs left and I can't read them because my Chrome browser has a spinning colorful rainbow ball. So we'll save those 3 articles until we meet again next time. Messi, over to you.
Yes.
We'll meet you over
The
there.
room is already pinned on top. So if you're interested in Tech Africa,
Tech Africa. See you there.
join Messi.
See you.
Thanks, Tyler.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Thank
Selamat
you.
datang
Bye.
Malaysia.
Thanks, Tyler.